The one shot we did, I was playing a Cleon doctor with 0 bedside manner. So I was like stabbing people with, to heal them. It's like, here,
You are alive. Quit your whining.
You are alive. Quit whining. Yeah, basically. Yes. I am surgical with this batleth. Hold still.
And that is why you're a World Eaters player. Welcome to Preferred Enemies, the Warhammer 40k podcast that knows putting spikes on everything makes it better. I'm your host, Rob.
Kevin.
And Richard.
No Dennis with us today. He got called away on work, so he will be joining us again for future episodes. But we are here to continue our faction focus series. Last time we talked about the many varieties of Space Marines, and we promised that we would talk about their fallen brothers. So we are going to be talking about faction focus chaos.
Spiky boys.
Spiky boys of all colors and creeds.
Fun to play the bad guys.
Yes. And these are, we mentioned last time, like, well, just because you're in the Imperium doesn't mean you're a good guy. These are absolutely the bad guys. There is no question. No, I'm gonna have to disagree with you there.
Yeah, I'd have to take the contrarian stance.
Yeah, but yeah, you would. Yes.
What is evil?
This. The thing we're about to talk about.
That's fair. This is evil. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So to understand the various forces of chaos, you have to understand what chaos is and what makes up kind of the ethos of the forces of chaos. And to understand that, you have to understand the warp, also known as the immaterium, the Empyrean. Basically, it's another dimension that is like butted up right against ours in the 40k universe, and in fact bleeds through in several spots where there have been storms and rips and tears in the fabric of reality. It is basically I would say three-dimensional, but dimensions and time don't really matter in the warp. It's not real. In fact, it is referred to as warp space, whereas our dimension is referred to as real space. And it is basically a roiling sea of energy and emotion that is effectively generated by all living things and their thought processes. It's the worst version of the Force.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you have ever seen the movie, and this is, such a widely popular thing, so everyone's going to get this reference, the 1997 movie Event Horizon, where they tap into a hell dimension as they're traveling through space, and monsters come and kill everybody. That's written, the writer has said that the idea for this came from Warhammer 40k, and this is basically the warp. That's the best, in media version of, or mainstream media version of what the warp is that I can kind of think of, where it's this hell dimension of bad things that, if you mess with it too much, bad things happen.
Right. And it's also the source of psychic powers. People who are genetically psychic tap into the energies of the warp and are able to draw those energies, pass them through their bodies, and use that energy to manifest psychic abilities. And that's also why
all goes really well.
Always goes
all
well.
The time.
Always. Nothing bad ever always happens with this. That's why, depending on how psychically active your species is, every being theoretically has a representation of the warp that shines based on how psychically powerful they are. In fact, there are some species, when we get to Xenos species, alien species in our next episode, we'll be talking about the Tau, and the Tau are a non-psychically active race. And so it's been described as they have little faint candlelight flickers in the warp, whereas humans actually would be like torches and psychic humans would be like bonfires, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Now, the warp, I mentioned it was a sea of energy and emotion, and strong emotions definitely have impacts on the warp. And when there is enough of one emotion at a massive scale, it can basically achieve sentience and become a warp being. And depending on what that emotion is and how big the event is, it can spawn a god. And it has spawned at least 4. Now, in the past, the fluff of 40K has had other minor chaos gods. How canonical those are at this point. 40K lore is wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. It changes. It is flexible. It lots of unreliable narrators and things that are kind of retconned or are at least recorded as, well, this was what we thought was true at the time, but somebody else wrote it down, or maybe someone wrote it down wrong at once upon a time. But we know that there are 4 chaos gods. All have been spawned by different events, although only one of them has technically occurred in the official 40K timeline. And the thing about the warp is also, I mentioned time and dimensions and space doesn't really matter in the warp that much. And so it's kind of this thing that once a chaos god is birthed, they always existed because time doesn't apply to them in a linear fashion. But the 4 chaos gods, first off, there is the god Khorne, the great god Khorne, god of rage, slaughter, bloodshed. If you've ever heard the phrase, and I know this has escaped 40K containment, blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne, you're talking about Khorne.
Yeah. I mean, really, we don't need to talk about anything else. I think Khorne's the fun one. So,
yeah, Khorne is a god of warfare and martial prowess, but more just in the sense of just win at all costs or lose. It doesn't matter. Fight at all costs.
And die. Yeah, fight and die. Yeah.
Another saying for Khorne is Khorne cares not from whence the blood flows, just that it does. Khorne doesn't care if it's your skull that ends up on the skull throne. He just wants skulls. He's a giant god of red, like flesh. Well, I mean, as fleshy as anything in the warp can be. Nothing in the warp can manifest in real space for long. And the gods generally don't make their own appearances. They send aspects and fragments of themselves. But Khorne is a giant red and brass monstrosity that sits on a giant throne of skulls somewhere in his corner of the warp and just draws power anytime there's massive bloodshed and warfare and murder. And often, if there's enough of that, it'll make the warp thin enough that his demons will start to spawn and break through. And it is easy to fall into the trap of Khorne, especially as this is a war game. There's lots of fighting. And if you just get lost in the frenzy of bloody fighting, you are inadvertently giving tribute to Khorne. Sometimes you can intentionally give tribute to Khorne.
Well, and I think you see, like, in a lot of media, video games, the animation, stuff like that, Khorne is the chaos aspect or the chaos god that comes up the most because it is the simplest. It's the easiest to represent. It's the easiest to put into, like, hey, we need to go fight something. Let's have them fight the god of war. So Khorne is definitely the simplest and most straightforward of the chaos gods.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on, we have the god Nurgle. Nurgle is a god of disease and decay, usually described as grandfather Nurgle, a gigantic, morbidly obese pile of green, rotting flesh sitting in the middle of a twisted garden with a giant vat from which he mixes up and spawns new diseases and plagues. But he is not a sad god. He is a very happy god because he also recognizes that disease and decay eventually is part of the cycle that leads to rebirth. I say he sits in the middle of the garden. His garden is fed by death. And then, granted, everything that grows, it's not a healthy rebirth. It is not a healthy, like, vegetation. This is all twisted plague-ridden, but like decaying, but not dead. And that's one of the things, is that everything decays and breaks down, but a lot of the things, things that are tied to Nurgle don't technically die because of it. They persist and endure. And so in that sense, it's kind of ironic that Nurgle is a god of rebirth, because he's also a god of stasis and entropy. Like everything falls apart and just kind of reaches this weird homeostasis of just a continuing, unchanging cycle of just constant decay and regeneration.
Like, I made the joke earlier that, like, oh, are the Chaos Gods really the bad ones? Nurgle is the one that I think you could actually make an argument, not that he's not evil, and not that they're not the bad guys, but you can make an argument that Nurgle is, like, a natural force, more so than the other ones, and definitely cares about, like, the people who dedicate themselves to Nurgle more so than the other three gods. The other three gods will throw their followers under the bus for any reason. Right. Nurgle does at least appear to care for his followers and take care of them, and they seem happy. Like,
I don't know if I would necessarily say they, like, the demons that spawn are all jolly things, and Nurgle is portrayed as a benevolent grandfather, just giving his gifts to people freely. A book I want to recommend is The Lords of Silence by Chris Raitt. And it is basically a story told from the viewpoint of Marines in the service of Nurgle and members of the Death Guard. And we'll get to what those are later. But it is not exactly a happy life, and the rot kind of causes them to lose themselves a little bit over time. Again, you just kind of can fall into a dull haze, and the process of getting there is not necessarily pleasant, because the initial stages of being affected by Nurgle are disease and dying. So it's not a fun time.
We're talking about Chaos Gods. This is still probably your best path, though. Like, if you're going to do this is still probably the best of the bad options.
Yeah. Still a bad option, just to be clear. Next up, and if you haven't caught on, I'm doing this in alphabetical order, Slaanesh. Slaanesh is an interesting god to talk about, because the way Slaanesh has been portrayed in past material is
sex, drugs, and rock and roll, baby.
Yeah, there's no nuance to. I mean, not that there's any nuance to Khorne, but Slaanesh also has no real nuance as far as how the portrayal has been in the past. But really, what Slaanesh is the god of excess.
Yeah.
The pursuit of something to the nth degree without any care of how you get there and what you have to do to get it. Whether it is the pursuit of pleasure, which is usually how Slaanesh has been portrayed, whether it's sexual pleasure or gluttony is one that I think they've focused on a little bit more in Age of Sigmar. There's a servant of Slaanesh in that fantasy setting where he's very rotund and he has half demonic servants like feeding him fine foods from a plate. That's also a form of pleasure, and who knows what those foods are made or who those foods are made from. There in some of these stories, the book Fulgrim from the Horus Heresy series discusses artists who fall under the sway of Slaanesh and become obsessed with making the perfect artwork and literally using parts of themselves or of unwilling volunteers to become parts of their paints and rendering people into paints, or the pursuit of the ultimate drug high by eventually rendering people down into drugs to get chemicals that you can't get any other way. It's that single-minded, I want this, I want the best sensation, the best feeling, or I just want perfection. The pursuit of perfection with complete disregard to everything else is also a form of excess that Slaanesh encourages and is a god of.
Well, I think it's very interesting that because of that, and like that's more of a newer interpretation, or like going fuller into that interpretation. I think that ultimately means that, like, in the meta sense of, like, the laws and, like, the future of the 40k universe, Slaanesh is ultimately going to win, because if you dedicate yourself to Khorne and you pursue this, the art of killing and, and wrath and slaughter and stuff like that, you will eventually fall to Slaanesh because you're falling into excess. If you were a follower of Nurgle and you're following, doing all this stuff, you will eventually fall to Slaanesh because to get to the highest level, you have to, like, dedicate yourself fully to it. So it's just very interesting that, like, the way it's kind of set up is that, like, ultimately, if you take it all to the logical extreme, Slaanesh is going to win amongst the Chaos Gods.
And that's interesting because Khorne and Slaanesh are, like, diametrically opposed.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Khorne hates Slaanesh's focus on hedonism and pleasure, and because Khorne feels that gets in the way of just going out in the battlefield and killing things. And I do think that, like, the argument can also be made, Khorne may win because Khorne doesn't care whether his followers live or die. Like, literally, like, if they die in his service, they still die. But if someone dies in the pursuit of perfection, then they have failed, and Slaanesh gets nothing more from that. So
true.
And that is something to keep in mind. The four gods of the Chaos Pantheon do not get along. In fact, they have been fighting for eternity because, again, once they exist, they always existed. A thing called the Great Game.
It's the Groundskeeper Willie thing from The Simpsons. Nobody hates chaos more than the Imperium or chaos. If it wasn't for chaos, we'd rule everything.
Right. And so, chaos often gets in its own way because each of the gods will fight, and occasionally one will become ascendant for a little while, and then the other three will temporarily work together to bring that one down, but then only in the service of bringing themselves up to the top. And none of them will ever win because they're all at tension with each other.
Yep.
Slaanesh is the youngest god. I mentioned that only one of the gods has been formed in what we consider the 40k timeline, which is anything, I'd say, roughly 10 to 20,000 years before the current point in the 40k timeline. And that is around 10,000 or so years ago, the race, the Eldari, the space elves, who we will talk about more in detail in our next episode, basically fell into because they are very psychically aware and they feel very strongly, they formed pleasure cults and started seeking the most excessive pleasures. And as a species, they did this. And eventually that act coalesced into the god Slaanesh. And when Slaanesh was born, it tore a hole in reality, which still exists to this day in the 40k universe, called the Eye of Terror, which is also the heart of the old Eldari Empire. It wiped out any Eldari that was not far enough away from the Eye of Terror. Just their souls were just immediately destroyed and consumed by Slaanesh. And it also had the side effect of being a giant blast that cleared away warp storms across the galaxy that opened up the opportunity for the Emperor to go send his Space Marine legions on the Great Crusade to retake the galaxy for humanity. So all of this kind of worked together. But we'll get more into the Eldari in our next episode.
I just want to say, I'm going to take a moment to express my own self-restraint here, because you said, like, blew a hole and swept away, and like a number of things in relation to the creation of Slaanesh that I'm just going to not comment on. Move right along.
I appreciate your maturity, sir. It's so out of character for you. Anyway. And then our final god, Tzeentch. Tzeentch is a god of fate, of magic, and a god of change. A god of change for the sake of change, of everything being in constant flux, of nothing ever remaining static, which puts Tzeentch and Nurgle in direct competition. Tzeentch is a god of fate in the sense that Tzeentch is theoretically aware of all fates of everyone in the universe, but also aware of all possible fates and does not know which one is actually going to happen. And also is a god of plots and making fate happen. Not so much destiny, but fate. And will have so many interchanging plots and interweaving plots that the plots will often undo each other.
Yeah.
Just Tzeentch cannot get out of its own way. Tzeentch is also the god of magic and sorcerers and magic knowledge, and so it is not uncommon for psychers to fall under the sway of Tzeentch in pursuit of deeper esoteric knowledge and then to get changed and altered by the god, and in fact sometimes become something more than human and sometimes just become a pile of flesh. Sometimes they will cast spells that will inflict the pile of fleshness upon other beings. So, because that's change. You have changed. You are no longer human. You are something else.
Or the opposite. They turn themselves into a pile of dust.
Yeah. Tzeentch is also often associated with fire, but not natural fire. Khorne tends to be more like flames, like dark red flames. Tzeentch is weird pink and blue and green flames that
prismatic spray.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, very much that. Also associated with bird motifs. Just like Slaanesh is often associated with like bull and horned animal motifs. Khorne is associated with like hound-like, dog-like motifs. Nurgle, slugs and frogs, kind of, and snails.
Yeah.
But you have you have these four gods that are competing with each other to be supreme, to basically impart their view and force their view of the universe, filter through the one set of emotions and feelings that they represent onto all of reality. And when that is done, that god will have won. And so you will have pockets of that happening. You will have demonic incursions, which can often be caused by psychers interacting with spirits and energies that they are not able to control. And we mentioned like nothing bad ever happens. No, often demons will come through their psychic powers. Although there is one god, one of those four, who is not have any truck with psychers, and that is Khorne. Khorne hates magic. Khorne feels that magic is not, and psychic powers are not as good as just a good stick in your hand to hit things with.
Hooker religions and ancient weapons are no good, no match for a good blaster at your side. Yeah.
Or a good stick.
Butchered that. Yeah, butchered that quote, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Chainsaw go burr.
Now, on the one hand, you'd think, well, what's the answer? Humanity just doesn't interact with the warp. If no one interacts with the warp, we're all fine. These gods have no ability to break in other than through the warp storms, which we just avoid. Except for the fact that also the warp is how humanity travels, and most species travel at greater than light speed. FTL travel pretty much depends on the warp. And in the case of human travel, it's you literally just tear open a hole in reality, fly your ship through, and use that as a shortcut. And hope you come out the right end at the right time. That also is a problem. And you have to have special field generators on your ship called Geller fields to keep the warp outside of your ship. You basically create like a little anti-warp bubble and try to skate through, because otherwise the warp will just manifest throughout your ship. It'll start altering your ship and changing it, and demons will appear on the ship and just start tearing into things. So it's not a good time. If your Geller field fails, you're going to have a bad time. Unless you're an orc. There have been orc ships that specifically fly through with no Geller field so they can fight things on the way.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That tracks.
So that is the essence of chaos and the four chaos gods. So how does that apply to the first of the factions we're going to talk about, which is the Chaos Space Marines? Since we talked about Space Marines last time, let's look at their fallen brothers. So the Chaos Space Marines are, as the name suggests, Space Marines who have decided to join forces with Chaos. Now, I mentioned in the last episode there was this little thing called the Horus Heresy, and I wasn't going to get into it very much at the time. And I mentioned that there were 9 legions that stayed loyal, and we talked about those. There were 9 legions that did not. There were 9 legions that turned traitor. And in one case, it was because the Emperor told them not to worship him as a god because he didn't see himself as a god, despite the fact that A, he had godlike power, and B, people worship him as a god in the current timeline, 10,000 years later, which they have to be getting a hell of a laugh out of. But that one, they basically decided, and we'll get to which one that is, but there was one group that decided, if he doesn't want to be worshipped, we'll worship the gods we used to worship on our old world, which just turned out to be the Chaos gods. Also, the Emperor made the absolutely brilliant decision to not inform anyone of the warp or the dangers they're in. Just kind of, if I don't tell them, they won't know it's there and nothing bad can happen. It's like telling someone to do laundry and not telling them to clean out the lint filter. No one can see the lint filter. Don't pay any attention to it. It's not like it'll burn the house down.
Wait, what's a lint filter?
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Hey, everyone, clean your lint filters.
Yes.
Please do. Change the batteries in your smoke detectors on a regular basis and clean your lint filters. Those are the two things you should do for fire prevention. Anyway, then that group decided to start corrupting the other group. Horus, the Primarch of the Sons of Horus, one of the legions, was basically left in charge of the crusade. At one point, the emperor decided, okay, I've done enough hands-on work. I have a project I need to take care of back on Earth. So you're my first son, first among equals, the first Primarch I rediscovered. You are my finest. You're in charge. You go finish up the crusade for me. And
everything worked out fine.
Everything worked out perfectly, except for the fact that his brother Lorgar, I'll go ahead and say it was Lorgar, the Primarch of the Word Bearers, who had been creating temples to the Emperor, and then he told them to not do that by psychically forcing them to kneel and watch as he nuked one of their cities that they had helped create, which made them a little bitter. Decided,
the Emperor may not be a good dude.
Yeah, and so decided, I'm going to go ahead and not only am I going to start worship the Chaos Gods, but like my uncle over here is going to, my uncle and my best friend, who are not good people and should never have been trusted, Erebus, like Corfarin and Erebus should never have been trusted. They've set up a plot to then corrupt Horus, and that is what led to Horus joining forces with the gods of chaos, all four of them, and they basically chose him as their champion and encouraged him to turn against the Emperor and bring other legions along with him. Now, along this path, other legions were kind of starting to fall into chaos their own way. Other things were going on. We'll talk about that when we get to them. But in the end, 9 legions went traitor. And then by the end of the Horus Heresy, some of them had gone very clearly to chaos. They had gone full in on some of the chaos gods. Some just kind of used chaos in general or served chaos in general through their actions or just by rebelling against the Empire. 4 of them went all in on one of the 4 gods each, and we'll get to those in a bit. But by the end, they were defeated. Horus was destroyed. And when I say destroyed, obliterated entirely. His soul was wiped out. He no longer exists in any way, shape, or form. And the remnants of those 9 legions fled into the Eye of Terror, that giant warp rift that was created when Slaanesh was born, and decided to hide there, lick their wounds, and wait for a chance to build back up and get revenge on the galaxy. And so 10,000 years later, they are still nursing that grudge, full of hate, and they've started really taking the war back to the Imperium. And in fact, during the event that took us from 7th edition to 8th edition, they managed to tear a massive rift in the galaxy, blow open the few things that were holding the Eye of Terror in, and split the galaxy in half with a giant warp rift that only has a few safe spots to travel through, and basically put the Imperium of Man on the back foot. And that is kind of where we are in the storyline, with the Imperium being split in half by this giant rift. Now, it's not just the remnants of those original 9 legions that are Chaos Marines. There are other Marine chapters that have turned traitor over the years for various reasons, and usually feeling like they have been given the short end of the stick. Like they feel like they're getting treated unfairly, or feeling that they're not being respected enough. Or perhaps they found an artifact that has slowly been corrupting them, or their psychers delved too deeply into a certain bit of knowledge, or they've just decided to, maybe they were nearly destroyed and they decided to go rogue, or maybe they've even been captured. There are some stories where like lone Marines will be captured and basically indoctrinated into a chaos warband. So there's any number of reasons why a group of Space Marines could go traitor, but all traitors eventually end up serving the forces of chaos. In addition, it's not just Space Marines. There are also humans that will go traitor. There are cults to various chaos gods across the galaxy. They will sometimes lie in wait and rise up, or sometimes even they are parts of a chaos Space Marine attack. They will encourage the creation of cults over time, and this is not the only time we're going to see this in other armies too, but they will basically create cults that will cause havoc for the Imperium just at the wrong time, and then the Chaos Space Marines will come in and do a massive attack, or they'll just use them as cannon fodder and just have thousands and thousands of Chaos cultists ready to go and just rush it, like unload them first, clog up the guns and defenses of the enemy, and then the real Space Marines come in and start causing trouble. There's also guardsmen who go traitor. Entire regiments of Imperial Guard will sometimes turn traitor, often in service of Khorne, although I've also seen Nurgle and Slaanesh. Tzeentch, not as much, just because the guardsmen tend to mutate in weird ways that make it hard to hold a gun. But like Khorne is not uncommon because warfare, soldiers, it's going to happen. You're just going to get people who just get really into taking trophies and inflicting bloodshed. Nurgle is not uncommon, especially because of some of the very nasty battlefields, chemical weapons that are used sometimes, or sometimes Nurgle will just infect people with diseases and just like, okay, I will make it hurt less if you join me. Yeah. And they will. The fear of death is one of the things that will get you joined up with Nurgle. There's also demon engines. There's a lot of war gear that Chaos Space Marines have in common with their standard brethren, but they've also combined demons with technology in ways that are unnatural and unholy. And so you have these giant walking constructs of flesh and metal and hate that they can just kind of send out. They're not robots necessarily because they are powered by a demon, but they are constructs for holding demons and sending them into battle. And also sometimes they will allow their own bodies to be taken over partially by demons. They're possessed units, whether they are like just possessed Space Marines, or there's the obliterators. They're Marines that have been infected by a techno-organic virus that takes over their body and possesses them, but also allows them to spawn any kind of weapon they want from their hands to cause the most damage on the battlefield. And occasionally you will have lords of chaos who will have that rare achievement of rising to demon princehood, who will have done enough in the service of the gods of chaos to become a demon themselves. Those are not necessarily the big leaders. You would think they would be, but they're not always. Sometimes they play second fiddle to the more mortal Chaos Space Marines. But it's just a very motley crew of Space Marine remnants and the possessed and hangers-on. Very much a rabble in many cases.
Yeah, these forces seem to be far less cohesive than Imperial forces, where, we've talked only about Space Marines so far, but Space Marines will sometimes work with guards and custodes and sisters, but they're all kind of their own individual organized forces that operate independently most times. In Chaos, it's like, no, you just kind of throw what resources together to go fight a battle, and then maybe they stay together after the fight, maybe they split back up and go their own ways.
Right.
So it's much more of like a collection of loose alliances than some of these other factions.
Very, very much so. In fact, some of the legions specifically just fractured into multiple war bands after the heresy, and are in some cases are only now starting to reform into larger organizations. Even then, it's still a loose coalition of war bands, because I think the thing that drives Chaos Space Marines the most, besides just their hatred of the Imperium, is driven by their pride. And I think that, like, if you had to say, like, what is the cardinal sin of the Chaos Space Marines, it is pride. It is a refusal to acknowledge that they've either that they lost, or the knowledge that they lost hurts them so deeply. And it's also like, because there's not a clear organization, it is very much a survival of the fittest, who is willing to do the most devious thing. There's often distrust inside war bands. Everyone's kind of jockeying for position, much like the Chaos Gods themselves. Everyone's jockeying for position because nobody wants to be the one on the bottom rung. It's like everybody wants to be a Chaos Lord. Everybody there's very few cases where somebody is just kind of happy with their lot of, hey, I'm like a mid-range infantryman. Yay. No, that doesn't really, although some people will be like, well, I'm going to bide my time, or maybe I'm just so insane I don't care. That's one case that does happen. Being constantly exposed to the warp and demons and having the dark gods talking in your brain constantly does not do much for the sanity of the Chaos Space Marines, but don't let that make you think that they are chaotic stupid. They are very dangerous foes for the Imperium because they have all these superhuman abilities that Space Marines have. They have all the knowledge. Some of them have 10,000 years of knowledge. Some of them remember fighting during the Horus Heresy. We mentioned that there's only a couple of Space Marines in Dreadnoughts, were alive during the Horus Heresy. There's many Chaos Space Marines that were alive, took part in the Heresy and still remember. So they consider themselves, in fact, one of the detachments is the same, the veterans of the Long War. They consider they have been at war with the Imperium for over 10,000 years. They remember most of it, and they are not ready to give up anytime soon. Now, despite being traitor Marines, they are not one-to-one. You can't just say here's Space Marine Intercessors, and then there's Chaos Space Marine Legionaries, and so everything has a perfect counterpart. For one thing, yes, there are a lot of counterparts as far as vehicles, like Land Raiders, Rhinos, Predators, various tanks, things like that. Those there are side-to-side comparisons of. Some, Space Marines, have Dreadnoughts, which are metal boxes that they put half-dead Space Marines in so they can continue to fight. The Chaos Space Marines have Hellbrutes, where they will take a half-dead Chaos Space Marine and refuse to let him die. Maybe he wants to die. He doesn't get to die. We're strapping you in the crazy box and making you fight. But one thing that Chaos Space Marines do not have, for one thing, they have not had the chance to upgrade to Primaris. There is no equivalent of the Primaris Chaos Marine. And in fact, I don't know if we've had any examples. I'm sure there have been. There's a lot of material out there, but we haven't seen anything that is a chaosified version of a Primaris Marine. As far as I know, we haven't had any Primaris only chapters turn traitor yet.
Yeah, not yet, but they've definitely hinted at that it's possible, because one of the whole things for the upgrade to Primaris was that they were going to be more resilient and less susceptible to that stuff, but they've already shown that that's not necessarily the case.
Right. And also there's just some war gear that Chaos Space Marines don't have. For example, the most iconic thing you don't get to have as a Chaos Space Marine is a drop pod. Now, drop pods don't get used a lot anymore, but once upon a time, with the way the rules have changed, drop pods were a constant fixture on the tabletop, and also they're constantly seen in the lore, where Space Marines, squad Space Marines will strap into a drop pod and they'll be fired from orbit, slam into the ground, doors pop open, they pop out and start fighting immediately. You'll see these in animations, games, etc. There are stories where Chaos Space Marine have drop pods.
Mm-hmm.
They have never had rules for them on the tabletop. And it is very bizarre. And you will have the whole thing talking about how, this chapter of Space Marines turned traitor and took all their stuff with them. Apparently they left the drop pods behind.
And things like Razorbacks and, some of the more useful tanks, They did leave the Nerf guns at home, though, so I'm fine with that.
Yeah. But, so it's just you can't just take a Marine army and nope, it's Chaos Marine army now. No, they have a very different makeup. And that's also why Chaos Space Marines have things like Possessed and Obliterators and things like that, because that is a chance to kind of have an up-powered Space Marine. They also have Veterans, which they refer to as Chosen, which kind of take the same role that you would have veterans in the regular Space Marine. So there are some equivalencies, but it is not one-to-one.
Yeah, it's an example of a divergent evolution where you start with the same starting point, and then you go, Chaos went one way, Space Marines went a different way. So you wind up with some similarities, but a lot of things that are different. If you do want to play like these Chaos Legions or these Chaos Armies as 1-to-1 to like non-Chaos Legions, that's what the Horus Heresy is for. At that point, they are functionally all the same, or at least identically looking, other than paint schemes, have access to the same things. That game is a whole other thing. It's a lot of fun, but it's a whole other thing. And in 40K, there's been 10,000 years of changes, evolution, upgrades, warping, stuff like that. So yeah, they are very, they play very differently, and they have a lot of different units. So it's not just Space Marines with extra bits on them. They are their own thing at this point.
Right. One other thing that Chaos Space Marines have access to is they can actually bring in a few things from other armies, and we'll get into those later, but something that is referred to, we tend to refer to, or you'll hear called cult troops, which are units from the 4 legions that did go all in on individual gods. They can bring those into their army and kind of represent forces of multiple legions and war bands working together for a common goal. Now, as far as army rules, now with the Space Marines, we had the very simple Oath of Moment rule, which was you pick a target, everybody rerolls hits against that target for the turn. Kind of representing that everybody is working together for a common goal. It's one big cohesive battlefield tactic. That is not what we have with Chaos Space Marines. Instead, we have a rule called Dark Pacts, which if you have the Dark Pact rule, anytime you're selected to shoot or fight, you can choose to get an upgrade. You can say, I would like to make a Dark Pact. I'm going to promise this action to serve the Chaos Gods. And so you can get either sustained hits 1 to give you more possible hits, or lethal hits to make your hits, like your critical hits when you roll 6, automatically wound. However, before you get that ability, you have to make a leadership test. If you pass, you get the ability. If you fail, you also get the ability, but you also take a random number of mortal wounds. So you may end up having to make blood sacrifices to get those bonuses. And it is a bit of a risk reward mechanic. I love risk reward mechanics. Mm-hmm. There are times when you absolutely just want to get as many kills as you can. So especially early on in the game, might as well go for it because your units are in full. Late game, that's when it becomes really risk reward. And you're like, I could really use sustained hits 1 right now. However, if I fail the roll, this unit will die because I've only got like 3 guys left. And I could end up rolling like the maximum number of mortal wounds. So it's like, do I do it? Yeah. And it used to be you would do the check for mortal wounds after you did your attacks, but then they changed it in the codex to, nope, do the mortal wound check first. Pay your dues to the gods. And so narrative-wise, it creates some interesting moments in game where it's just like, oh yeah, I need to pray to Slaanesh to see if I can get extra attacks with these guys, because I tend to play Slaanesh themed Chaos Space Marines. And nope, Slaanesh was not pleased with that sacrifice, and they wanted more.
It is a fun risk reward though. Like I do like that mechanic.
Yeah, and there's a number of detachments that will kind of play into that a little bit more, or sometimes we'll see in other armies that kind of recreate this ability in other ways. But yeah, the entire idea that each of these groups is in it for themselves. They're making their own pacts with the gods to get an extra benefit, to draw on that power. It's kind of like a dark side of the force kind of thing. I'm going to use force metaphors a lot. We've already talked about how the warp is the worst kind of the force. We travel through warp kind of like it's hyperspace. Now we're using the warp to increase our abilities, but it can take from you if you do not please it. And anything that affects your leadership also affects your chance to make that roll. Although there's also a number of units who have access to upgrades that give them chaos icons. And taking a chaos icon is often a good choice because those usually give you a reroll specifically on Dark Pact checks. So basically, if you carry the iconography of the Dark Gods, they will be more likely to give you their power. Now, as far as detachments and how this army plays, there's quite a few. Thanks to the latest Grotmus release, there are 11 detachments for playing Chaos Space Marines to represent the different way these forces do battle. And while in the Space Marine one, it was much more along the lines of these always match these particular chapters of Space Marines. There is some of that, but there's also a few that really deviate and go in particular directions that are not necessarily tied to a particular legion. But we're going to start off with they always tend to put the generic detachment first, the one that is just the most all around useful detachment, just kind of like we had the Gladius in the Space Marine Codex. We have Veterans of the Long War, and the Veterans of the Long War ability, which is called Focus of Hatred, is Oath of Moment. Woo. At the start of your command phase, you pick a unit from your opponent's army to be your Focus of Hatred. Until the start of the next command phase, you re-roll hits against it. Except for your non-Space Marine units, your damned units, which is what they were like. Anything that is a cultist or a traitor guardsman has the damned keyword, coming from an old name that they applied to them years and years ago, the Lost and the Damned, because in the eyes of the Imperium, they are damned to destruction. But basically, being Veterans of the Long War, this is Oath of Moment, but only for your things that are actually Chaos Space Marines. So your cultists and your Traitor Guard do not benefit from it. And again, it is just kind of a good all-around detachment. It serves everything. Like anything will work with this. And then we get into more unique playstyles. First off, we have the Deceptors. The Deceptors are interesting in that you select, based on the game size, a number of legionaries. Specifically, it has to be legionaries units, which are your kind of stock troop battle line Marine forces, and cultist mobs, and any characters that are attached to them. And they gain infiltrators, so you can place them on the board outside of your deployment zone. And this represents having sneaky forces lying in wait to spring a trap on the opposing forces, or having all your pieces in a row ready to go and do an attack. And also use these cultists in ways that they'll eat up the firepower and let your real chaos forces actually get the work done. There's Renegade Raiders, which is all about moving quickly and taking objectives. All your weapons get assault, and anytime you target a unit on an objective marker, your armor penetration gets better. This one's all about transports, bikers, moving quickly, and just taking objectives. Not necessarily holding on to them, but taking them. You've got the Dread Talons, which are all about causing fear. Chaos Space Marines love using terror troops, and we'll get into a particular legion that likes that especially well. But this one is all about causing battle shock on your opponent, which, if you're unaware of what battle shock is, if you're new to 40K, basically, if you've taken a certain number of losses, or if something just makes you make a battle shock test, you make a leadership check, and if you fail, you can't hold objectives, you can't use stratagems. That can, at certain points, can absolutely kneecap somebody's strategy if you can apply it well. And if you're Dennis, who is not here, you fail every battle shock test you make. So sometimes it can be very effective. And we're starting to see more armies kind of leaning into that. This is an early version of that. We're going to see one later that is a little bit better. Next up, the Fellhammer Siege Host, which is basically just about being resilient, about just moving forward. Doesn't matter like what weaponry is being fired at you, you are moving forward and eventually taking objectives. The detachment rule here is something we saw with like the Dark Angels, transhuman physiology. If the strength is higher than your toughness, your opponent's when they hit you, your opponent is at -1 to wound. Especially for your vehicles, because they are going to have higher toughnesses. You see it being more effective there, but really nothing here is limited to vehicles. In fact, there's a number of things here that target infantry, like your stratagems that serve your infantry. So it's just about being able to move forward and not take the damage. Pact-bound Zealots, which is all about serving the Chaos Gods directly. And this is one where every time you take a unit, unless they're like already an epic hero, a named character, you pick one of 5 marks. You choose to mark them for Khorne, mark them for Tzeentch, mark them for Nurgle, mark them for Slaanesh, or you can mark them as Chaos Undivided. I'm not into one particular god. I serve everybody. based on what mark you've selected, when that unit shoots or fights, and depending on whether you choose to take lethal hits or sustained hits, the benefit changes. So, for example, Khorne gets lethal hits in melee on a 5-up instead of only on rolling 6s to hit. So on a roll, if you roll a 5-up to hit, you count as having a critical hit. If Slaanesh and you were shooting and you picked sustained hits, you are more likely you get sustained hits on a 5-up instead of just a 6. And for Chaos Undivided, it's just you reroll hit rolls. You're just generally good. And as to be expected, Psykers can't take the mark of Khorne because Khorne hates Psykers. But you also don't have to take the same mark throughout your army. You can mix and match. And in fact, the various stratagems and upgrades have things for all the gods, so it does kind of encourage you to mix. But if you also want to make a force that is leaning into one god particularly, this is a totally valid way to do that.
Yep.
You have the Chaos Cult, which is just about bringing as many cultists as you can. We don't necessarily care about, the big guys in power armor are great, but we're going to flood the board with cultists. And this one basically gives you an extra kind of dark pact you can make. So when you choose to move, you can make what they call a desperate pact, which is the same thing as a dark pact. It functions identically. But basically, you make the same kind of attempt to please the dark gods. You might take some damage. There's a lot of you. It's not a big deal. You get extra movement. And this one has actually been one of the stronger detachments because it turns out if you flood the field with so many bodies that your opponent can't move out of the deployment zone, you win games.
Yeah.
Plus, it has ways to return dead models to the army. But yeah, you basically, you just flood the board and, maybe have a few heavy hitters to kind of shore up your army. But otherwise, there are some really nasty cultist units. Also, cultist units can get big.
Mm-hmm.
And they're battle lines. So you can have like 120 cultists on the board. Plus, Traitor Guard can get to be battle line in this detachment. So you can have a ton of bodies. Plus, there are cursed cultists who are really nasty in close combat because they're foul mutants with extra arms and toughness and nastiness. And there are leaders that can make them even better. So they've had to rebalance this one with points and other changes a number of times to get it to be back down to average usefulness. But it's not tied to a particular legion. It is just we're going to flood the board with mortal bodies. There's the Soul Forged War Pack, which is all about those demon engines. Your demon vehicles have a chance to make their dark packs better. They are more likely to take damage from the dark pack, but it also makes them more likely to stick wounds. They get +1 to wound anytime they invoke a dark pact. And that's in addition to the normal benefit you get from using a dark pact. And pretty much everything here is for making your demon vehicles better. We also have 3 detachments that are not in the Codex. The first is the Cabals of Chaos. This wasn't a Grotmus detachment. This was just a balanced data slate detachment.
Yeah,
I believe.
I think this was, yeah.
Yeah, this is one they just added. And it basically focuses on your Psykers and your Demon Princes, and basically anybody taking dark packs within 9 inches of them, I believe, get better. Their dark packs are better. You don't see this one played an awful lot. What you do see played a lot is the next one, Creations of Bile. This one's an interesting one because this one actually, I think you have to give a little bit of lore behind this one to explain it. There is a character in the story named Fabius Bile. He was an apothecary of the Emperor's Children Legion, who we'll be talking about later, but he kind of went freelance. His particular form of obsession was figuring out how to improve upon the Emperor's design of Space Marines. And so he does a lot of experimentation and alteration of gene seed and those organs that get implanted. He's done a lot of work with the Drukhari, which an alien race that does a lot of weird experimentation themselves. And so he has learned a lot about biology and the really twisted things you can do to it. And so the Creations of Bile represent those groups of Space Marines, those war bands where he has directly applied his services and made them even more monstrous. And so in that case, you can choose one buff or randomly roll 2 from a list, which just like improves like strength, toughness, movement, things like that. But it basically makes your all your Space Marines, your Chaos Space Marines, except for Damned, it makes them better. That one is very popular. Also, Fabius Bile has been in the game for a long time, so he's kind of a popular side character. He has his own set of novels that are just about him. A very interesting character, very distinctive, as he wears a skin coat, like a coat made of skin, and he has little surgical acolytes that follow him around.
This would be a good detachment to convert some Primaris Space Marines into Chaos guys.
Yeah, see, that would be a good one. Yeah, because then you could just like, well, these guys are the improved version of Chaos Space Marines. So yeah, that one would be a neat way if you wanted to do a Primaris to Chaos conversion. And then our most recent one, this one was just added in the last week or so during this year's Grotmas releases, is the Nightmare Hunt, which is literally the Dread Talons, that Battle Shock detachment, but with better rules, like more rules. But otherwise, it's like functionally identical. Like even if you look up reviews of it, they're like, yeah, so they took the Dread Talons and they actually applied more things to it to fix the problems with the Dread Talons detachment. So I really don't think you'll be seeing too many people running Dread Talons when Nightmare Hunt is available, but it is functionally the same. Now, much like we did with Space Marines, let's talk about the sub-factions of Space Marines that are represented in this book and by some of these detachments. So first off, we have the Black Legion. The Black Legion is what was once the Sons of Horus, who is dead, as I mentioned, completely obliterated, wiped out, no longer around, not coming back anyway. Basically, they took on the name of the Black Legion, not out of mourning, if I remember right, but out of shame.
Yeah.
Because the Sons of Horus were blamed for a long time by the other Chaos Space Marine legions for getting them into the Horus Heresy in the first place, which is fair.
Yeah, this is not wrong.
Not wrong. And in fact, there's a really good series by Aaron Dembski-Bowden.
I mean, in general, when you say there's a good book series, it's either by Aaron Dembski-Bowden or Dan Abnett. So
yeah. But Aaron Dembski-Bowden, who is one of the best Black Library writers, there's a trilogy planned, but only 2 of them are out now. It's called The Talon of Horus and Black Legion. And I've read both of them. They are fantastic. And it basically is the rise of the Black Legion, how the Black Legion went from being outcasts among outcasts into kind of the unifying force that has been leading the various chaos incursions back into real space as part of the Long War, and especially focused on Ezekiel Abaddon, also known as Abaddon the Despoiler, one of Horus's second in command from a group called the Mournival. I think he was the one that survived, and how he's basically decided he's going to do what Horus could not. Like, he doesn't hold his Primarch in high esteem. He's like, my Primarch screwed up and was a failure and he lost, and we're in this crappy situation because of him. I'm going to do better. And it is his machinations over 13 Black Crusades, which for a long time, Abaddon was kind of seen as a joke because, oh, well, he's done all these Black Crusades and he can never seem to get the job done. I guess he's not that useful. Turns out, they kind of retconned that later going into the transition from 7th to 8th, that each one of those crusades was to get something in particular, to do a thing. And he does the thing and then kind of leaves his forces to just get beat on while he retreats with the thing. And the 13th Black Crusade was, I did the other 12 to get all the pieces into place. Now I'm going to break the Eye of Terror wide open. And he did. And so that has been very successful. And so he has proven himself to be the leader that pretty much is Horus's, like, he is in the tradition of Horus, and he is as useful as Horus. He is also someone who is empowered by all 4 chaos gods, but refuses to declare fealty to any of them. He's kind of playing that same game of, no, I don't work for you, you work for me type situation is what he's trying to maintain. I would say the closest thing to compare them to is the Ultramarines. They are the well-rounded all comers. We have all the tools. We use them all well force of Chaos Space Marine. The bog standard Chaos Space Marine, Black Legion represents that very well. They're in black with gold trim. They don't necessarily need to carry around the shame anymore. They still have decided we are the Black Legion. That is what we are. And they are represented by the veterans of the Long War detachment. Again, just we are in every way as good, if not better, than our Space Marine brethren, because we also have the power of the Dark Gods at our back. Moving on, we have the Alpha Legion. The Alpha Legion is interesting because they didn't have a Primarch. They had Primarchs, too. Twins they were. For a long time, there was Alfarius, and sometimes he would be called Alfarius Omegon, which Alpha and Omega, clever.
Oh, wait, that's what that means?
Yeah. But at some point...
Were they the last Legion found?
They were, the 20th Legion, in fact.
Sorry, just being... Yeah, sorry, go on.
But
this is the level of artistry we're dealing with in some of the writing.
Right, yes. Subtlety, not the mark of early 40k, right? But Alfarius was, sometimes referred to as Alfarius Omegon, and it turns out that's because there were two, Alfarius and Omegon, and you rarely ever would see both of them at the same time. And in fact, it was not uncommon, at least in the early lore. I find this funny. It was not uncommon in the early lore for... When asked if you asked any random Alpha Legion Marine during the Horus Heresy who he was, well, I'm Alfarius. And that's kind of been their catchphrase ever since, except for the fact that Alfarius and Omegon were Primarchs. Primarchs are to Space Marines what Space Marines are to normal people. They're that much larger. It's like, who are you? I'm Alfarius. Yeah, pull the other one. You're not nearly tall enough.
So the explanation I've heard for this is that all of the Primarchs were custom designed to be unique and special in their own ways. Alfarius and Omegon were, because there were two of them, instead of them being the 15-foot tall giants that the other Primarchs are, that they were closer to normal Space Marine size as part of like the ability to infiltrate and, blend in more. I don't know how current that is in like lore, but that's the explanation that I've always heard as to why why there's two of them, and B, how they are able to kind of blend in more and legitimately make the claim that, any member of, I am Spartacus, any member of this legion could actually be the Primarch.
Right. And once upon a time, there was an actual ability for the Alpha Legion that was called I am Alfarius. And the idea is like, anytime your warlord died, no, he wasn't my warlord. That was a fake. There's my real warlord over there. And you make another character your warlord. The Alpha Legion, they were known as spies and infiltrators. They excelled at those kinds of distraction attacks. It's like putting pieces into place, triggering events, using the chaos that's created to, carry out whatever mission they had to do. Similar in theory to things like the Raven Guard, but whereas the Raven Guard are more just stealth experts, these were actually like infiltrators, getting the right people into the right positions to cause the most trouble, the most destruction, to the point of impersonating other forces. And in the current lore, it is not unusual for Alpha Legionnaires to kill Marines, take their armor, or repaint their armor to look like another kind of force and pretend to be normal Marines until such time as, okay, now the attack's on, and then turn on the people who think that they're their allies. This happened during the Arcs of Omen. Wasn't there a Death Watch kill team that turned out to actually be an Alpha Legion infiltration squad?
Yeah, and I don't know that they all realized they were all Alpha Legion. That's the amazing part with Alpha Legion is there's so much like infiltration subterfuge going on that often two Alpha Legionnaires won't realize that they're both pretending to not be Alpha Legionnaires. To the point as well that there's also like some hints in the lore that the Alpha Legion writ large didn't actually turn traitor, maybe, during the heresy. Like, obviously individuals did, but individuals did on every legion. But like that maybe they were so deep in the weeds that somebody forgot the plan and they got lumped in with the traitors, even though they may not have completely been or always had been. It's very murky, which I love.
Right. Yeah. Lore-wise, Alfarius died, we think. We're pretty sure. We think Alfarius died. But the problem is he has a twin brother, which means he didn't. Kind of. He's there. There is an Alfarius around. It just may be Omegon, actually.
I will say this about the Alpha Legion. If anybody makes a declarative statement about anything about the Alpha Legion, they're wrong.
Yeah.
Just don't believe it. Nothing that anybody says, including what we're saying right now about the Alpha Legion, is confirmed to be true or will be true the next time that they write another novel.
Yeah. Now, this is one thing you can know about the Alpha Legion. They wear blue and green. Yeah, it's like no declarative statements, except. But yeah, they tend to, like, when you see them outside of disguise, they tend to wear bluish green power armor, often with like serpent motifs, scales. The Hydra is, one of their logos. Very much a, like, you can't cut off the head of this. And no, that wasn't the real leader. It was that guy over there. They are represented in the game by the Deceptors detachment, which allows them to infiltrate cultists and legionaries into key positions and cause disruption that way. Next up, you have the Iron Warriors. These are known as siege experts, going back to the early days of the Crusade. They were one of the first legions sent on the Crusade, and they were very cold and calculating and very capable. And they didn't go for glory much. They just were like very workmanlike. Let's just get the job done. And they were given a lot of the really worst jobs, like the ones that would just grind them down in attrition. And they would rebuild. They had very stable gene seed, so it was very easy for them to rebuild their numbers. But their Primarch, Perturabo, who was already kind of a dour, unfun individual, this just made him even more bitter.
You could say he was perturbed a lot.
In fact, he was perturbado. Yes, again, the naming is not subtle on these characters. So when Horus said he was turning against the Emperor, Perturabo was right on board. Like, he was totally fine with it because he was already unhappy about the lot. I mentioned that one reason that you might turn traitor is because you're just you don't feel like you're given the due that you deserve. And Perturabo definitely felt that way. Also, he and Rogaldorn hated each other with a passion because they were both siege experts. And he felt that the Imperial Fists got a lot more love and support from the Imperium than his forces, who were just thrown into the worst meat grinders and just had to deal with it. And so they have kind of incorporated that sense of, we are just unstoppable. Their statement is iron within, iron without. So the idea is, like, we wear iron armor, but we are iron inside because we are just that tough and unstoppable. If you ever see somebody in like plain silver with a yellow and black hazard stripe motif on their shoulder pad, you're looking at an Iron Warrior. They are not technically thrown in with any Chaos God, but they do tend to use more demon engines because they tend to use vehicles more. Just because vehicles are also resilient and can get their troops where they need to be so that they can then come out and just walk forward and, just wear down the enemy. They tend to be represented by the Fellhammer Siege Host, which again gives them Iron Fortitude, is literally the name of the detachment. It's like, this is not subtle. This is supposed to be the Iron Warriors detachment. Then we've got the Night Lords. Hoo boy! The Night Lords were a legion that the Emperor specifically created to be terror troops.
Yeah, the War Crimes Legion.
Yes, very much so. When the Legion was originally formed, it was formed of like survivors of prison pits, and it didn't get any better when they found their Primarch, Conrad Kurz, also known as the Night Haunter, who had basically become, on his world, the worst Batman ever. And I mean worst as in, what if Batman but a villain, but also enforcing the law? The Night Lords were known for flaying their victims alive and wearing the skins as coats and keeping skulls and heads hanging off as trophies to instill fear into their enemies. This is before they went traitor.
Yeah.
These were terrible people before they went traitor.
Dedicated Khorne units will like have like skulls and heads and trophies and stuff like that. These guys did it on their own. Like, they did it well before they were like, yeah, we're going to throw it with the Chaos Guy. They're like, no, we just like this.
Yeah, this is our thing. And Conrad Kurz was also, like we mentioned how Sanguinius was psychically aware, had visions, kind of knew what was going to happen to him, and that psychic awareness is what led to the Black Rage in the Blood Angels. That's not what's happened here, but Conrad Kurz was somewhat psychically active, and he also had visions, and they made him somewhat insane. And so basically he kind of saw that like where this was all going ahead of time, and he just decided like the Emperor's gonna fail, so I'm just gonna keep doing my own thing. And in the end, he was already not accepted really by the other legions, so him going traitor, because he'd already decided like the Imperium is like has no space for people like him. And he was also like, it's one of these things, he's so devoted to order, not necessarily law and justice, but just to order, that he's like, I'm willing to do the terrible things to make this work. What happens to us? You know, we mentioned like the Thunder Warriors getting put down. Conrad Kurz was kind of I'm going to terrible things will be done, so I'm fine with that. That's who I am.
It reminds me a lot of the operative from Serenity, where it's like, yeah, no, I do all these horrible things. I kill all these people to maintain the order and like create a better world. I'm not going to get to see it, but I'm going to do it because I believe in that.
Right.
Yeah. Conrad Kurz was very much like, oh yeah, no, I there's no place for me in a future, utopian Imperium, but I'll kill who I have to kill to make it happen.
Right. And in fact, before the end of the heresy, the Emperor sent like assassins to kill Conrad Kurz. It's like, this guy's a wild dog. Like he can't be controlled. He's just going to destroy everything. So, and eventually after the heresy, he was eventually put down by an assassin. And just to kind of put this into context, here's his quote that he gave to the assassin before he died. Your presence does not surprise me, assassin. I have known of you ever since your craft entered the eastern fringes. Why did I not have you killed? Because your mission and the act you were about to commit proves the truth of all I have ever said or done. I merely punished those who had wronged, just as your false emperor now seeks to punish me. Death is nothing compared to vindication.
Also, like, just to go back to the, literary references that are squarely on the nose, this is Conrad Kurz as the Primarch, and he is killed by an Imperial assassin called M. Sheen, and basically that was the speech from Heart of Darkness. So,
yep.
Yeah.
AKA Apocalypse Now. Yeah. Yeah, again, not subtle.
But it's Conrad with a K.
It is Conrad with a K.
So it's different.
It is legally distinct.
Yes. Visual motif for the Night Lords, besides the aforementioned flayed flesh cloaks, is blue power armor riven with lightning bolts, because spooky, and
Dopest
red bat
color
wings. They look fantastic. If you want a set of Marines who look just terrifying and evil, you can't go much better with the Night Lords. The Night Lords are made to look scary. They're also one of the only Chaos Legions to have a special kill team set with an upgrade sprue that specifically makes them into Night Lords. And I believe there's an upcoming kill team box, I think was it Shadow Vault, that has been announced, that is going to have a unit of Night Lords jump troops. They're also known for using jump troops because nothing is scarier than just dropping a bunch of psychotic murderers into the middle of a group and just watching them blend people. They tend to be represented by originally the Dread Talons detachment. I would say now the Nightmare Hunt is the better version of that. So if you want to play Night Lords, that is likely the way to go. One of the more interesting sub-factions, one of the interesting legions from just like a visual and kind of lore background.
Yeah.
Then we have the Word Bearers. I mentioned the Word Bearers earlier, the legion that decided, well, if we can't worship the Emperor, we're going to worship somebody else. And they have leaned into that. Their Primarch is Lorgar, who, any of the Primarchs, I will say, like Conrad Kurz, dead. Alfarius, possibly dead. Omegon might still very well be alive. Perturabo and Lorgar are still alive. They have both become demon princes, demon primarchs, although we have yet to see what they look like. No models have been released of them. But Lorgar is leading a legion and he pretty much stays home. But the rest of the Legion is out basically trying to increase the number of people worshiping the dark gods and thus disrupting the Imperium. They love defacing and defiling shrines of the ecclesiarchy because, they're like, well, no, you told us we were having the wrong religion. No, that's the fake religion. You worshiping that emperor guy. He's a false emperor. These are the real gods. And so they are also known for using a lot of cultists, primarily. Everything they do is devoted explicitly to the gods, and not any one god in particular. They serve all the chaos gods. They tend to be seen in dark red and like sometimes silver, sometimes more gold, depending on like what era of word bearers you're going for. And they are most represented by those pack-bound zealots, the pack-bound zealot detachment, where you actually mark all your units for different gods or all the gods. Although I would also argue, like, you've got the chaos cults, which could work for either Alpha Legion or word bearers, and Cabal of Chaos I think would also work very well for word bearers, because again, it's like you've got psychers and demon princes improving stats for people, like improving the abilities for people when they do dark pacts near them, so using them kind of as the locus for serving the dark gods. And then finally, I've got one that's not a legion, but is in fact a separate cult, a separate faction, and that would be the cult of Vashtor. Vashtor is a relatively new character. He is interesting in that he is not a demon prince exactly. He is a demon. He is not a chaos god. He is not tied to any of the particular chaos gods, but he has dreams of godhood, and he is basically the demon of dark technology. And anyone can make deals with Vashtor. Like a lot of demons, Vashtor will offer you deals, but unlike other demons, because most demons will try to screw you on the deal. They will promise you something if you do something for them or give up your soul to them, but it's always kind of like that monkey's paw, backhanded, really, you're not going to get what you want in the end. I'll get what I want. Vashtor makes deals that are straight up honest. Like, you do this thing for me and I will give you access to this technology and weaponry. Once you've done your thing for me, you can have it, no strings attached. And that happened during the Arcs of Omen campaign, where he created these gigantic conglomerate space Hulk ships and gave them to Abaddon and a bunch of Chaos Warlords and said, I need these various fragments of things and relics. Bring them to me, collect them for me. But otherwise, these ships are yours. Go use them for whatever you want. Just make sure to bring me my thing. And it worked very well for him because he was able to make his plot work and reconstruct a destroyed planet, specifically the destroyed planet of the Dark Angels, Caliban, and make a demon world version of it that he is now flying through the webway in a very weird tunnely fashion.
I will push back a little bit on him making honest deals, because he did steal my soul and then murder me at the Grand Narrative 2 years ago. Or 3 years ago. So, yeah.
That's your own fault.
I mean, yeah, but still, like they did, Vashtor did specifically murder him of multiple hundreds of people. So, all of the followers.
Well, yeah.
But yeah. No, Vashtor is the Chaos Arms dealer, so you trust him exactly as much as that implies.
Right. But he is probably like the newest sub-faction. Like I said, It's not tied to a particular legion or warband or anything. It's just Vashtor can join pretty much any army in this book, and I actually enjoy kind of playing Vashtor because it does encourage you to go with like obliterators and demon engines and kind of do something different. And so he is represented by the Soulforged Work Pack detachment. And that gets us through the Chaos Space Marine book. But there are still 4 more legions to talk about, plus a couple other armies. And we will get to those after we take a break for our sponsors. But first, if you want to support the show, there are 3 great ways for you to do that. First is to support our Patreon. We are at patreon.com/preferred enemies. And it's an online tip jar. If you want to support the show, it's basically $1 a month. We don't have tiers at present, although we still keep poking around the idea of having like a several $100 tier, and Kevin will print you things if you're willing to give us that much money. No one's really bitten on that one yet, so we'll see what happens. But no, it basically for $1 a month or more, however much you want to give, but $1 a month, you get access to the Preferred Enemies Discord, or specifically the Preferred Frenemies Discord, where we hang out with our other patrons. You get access to any exclusive game material we make, such as our Urban Conquest update for 10th edition. And you also get your name in the credits of the video versions of our show. So if enough people pitch in, it adds up and it really does help support the show. It also gets you access to an ad-free version of the show. So if you don't like the commercials before, during, and after the show, $1 a month, you get the show ad-free. Second way to support us is, I mentioned the video version. We are on YouTube at youtube.com/@preferredenemies. And you can do the standard YouTube thing there. Watch our videos, like, subscribe, comment, engage, help us claw our way through the algorithm. We did finally break 200 subscribers, which again, it's a tiny amount in YouTube space, but every bit we get gets us closer to hitting, to break through to more people and get more people aware of the show, and also to help us eventually get more monetization so we can turn that around into things we want to do with the show, like traveling to other events. Third is merch. We are at preferredenemies.com/merch. You'll find our merch store, and you can buy hats, shirts, stickers, mugs, stuff like that, just with the Preferred Enemies branding. We've got a couple of shirt designs in the works that we're going to be adding soon. And also, all the things I've been talking about, supporting us on Patreon, helping us get to monetization on YouTube, we are hoping to be able to take that money along with the ad revenue from the ad-supported version of the show and put that towards hiring artists and designers to help us design more merch. Also do things like getting Preferred Enemies like dice and other tchotchkes and things that we can give away when we go to events. We would love to have that available. So to do that, we need your help, and those are 3 great ways you can support the show. So we're going to go ahead and take a break for our sponsors, and when we come back, the 4 God-specific legions and a couple other chaos forces. See you in a bit. And we're back, and that means it's time to continue our faction focus on chaos with a look at the 4 Chaos God specific legions and then a couple of additional forces. So first off, we're going to go in alphabetical order. The Death Guard. This is the legion that is devoted to the god Nurgle, that god of disease and decay. Their Primarch is Mortarion, who is now Demon Prince of Nurgle. All the Primarchs for these groups are alive and are all Demon Primarchs at this point. The Death Guard were another one of these forces that was very workmanlike as far as combat went, very resilient. And after they found Mortarion, who basically grew up on a poison planet, they also started incorporating a lot of chemical and biological warfare into their attacks. And Mortarion also did not enjoy the love of the Emperor as much as he felt he should. One of the things is he was trying to finish off an uprising against the alien overlords on his planet, and he almost made it by himself. Like, he basically had to work through these increasingly toxic clouds of poison to get to the alien overlords, and he tried to do it on his own, and he almost made it, but it even overwhelmed his Primarch metabolism, and it took the Emperor, basically got him there the last bit of the way, and Mortarion never felt like he was sufficient to do it on himself, and so he never cared for the Emperor after that, so it was very easy for him to turn traitor. They did not, however, join Nurgle until like it was starting to happen a little bit during the earlier days of the heresy, because Callus Typhon, who eventually became Typhus, who is a leader in the Death Guard, he was making deals with Nurgle, but eventually on the way to Terra, the Death Guard main battle fleet was going through the warp, and Typhon invoked a ritual to becalm the warp and basically still the ships in the warp and infect everyone with horrible diseases. And because of their space marine biology, the diseases weren't killing them, but it was making their lives miserable and suffering and causing them to suffer. And eventually Mortarion was approached and said, okay, look, if I will let you through, I will help your son survive this if you pledge yourself to me. And Mortarion took the deal. And when they emerged from the warp, they were Plague Marines. And so all of these have kind of tragic stories, except for maybe one. I'm going to say one of these four does not have really a tragic story, but yeah, the Death Guard basically all because of Mortarion's pride, and then his devotion to his troops was their ultimate downfall, sadly. And but ever since, they have gleefully decided to try to tear down the universe with rot and decay, and they have just become bloated and fused to their armor. Again, I recommend reading The Lords of Silence because it really talks to I remember the days when I could take my helmet off, or when my eye lenses weren't my eyes, that kind of thing. Also, lots of fly motifs. That's another creature that is associated with Nurgle, obviously because of its connection to disease. And so this is an army that is built around resilience, just being too tough to wound. They are focused around debuffing, applying penalties to the enemy forces around them as they just exude toxins and disease. And also, there's a subset of inflicting mortal wounds as your own body rebels against you from just the toxicity around them. And so their army rule is Nurgle's Gift. Nurgle's Gift is interesting because it's one that grows bigger as the game goes on. Basically, it starts out as a 3-inch aura, and then it becomes a 6-inch aura, and then it becomes a 9-inch aura near the end of the game. And what that aura does is it applies a status called Afflicted. And if you are afflicted, and this is not the only thing that applies the afflicted keyword, but there are other things that apply the status. If you are afflicted, you are both -1 toughness, which makes you easier to wound, and that also applies to vehicles as the vehicle's armor starts to rot and decay and rust. But also you get to choose one of 3 debuffs, whether it's -1 to hit, -1 to your saves, or -1 to your movement, leadership, and objective control. And you pick one of those at the beginning of the game, and now everybody that's affected by the afflicted status, which eventually is anybody who's just near you, they all get those penalties. So the idea is just my troops are tough, you won't be able to kill them all, and then we'll get up closer to you and you will feel this pain of our plagues, and eventually you will fail, is kind of the goal that they go with. And so it's a little bit of just winning by attrition, just that you're tougher than they are. Although they also have a little bit of a horde aspect, as that this is the army that has plague zombies. So if you want to do zombie apocalypse army, Death Guard is also the way to go, because Nurgle's toxins may kill you, but you don't necessarily stay dead, and you end up with a twisted smile on your face as it makes you happy to be dead and a zombie.
I mean, look, I'd rather be a happy zombie than an unhappy zombie.
Yeah. And I mean, it's easier to be happy when you're a zombie when you're not just dead.
Right,
Yeah.
This is true. And also something you'll see in this army a lot is lethal hits on a lot of weapons, just to represent the idea that if these toxins get through your armor a little bit, it will hurt you. And also, again, I mentioned toughness. Their base troops are tough 6. To put that in comparison, a Space Marine, which is superhuman, is toughness 4. So these are harder to wound. Strong weaponry may only have a 50-50 chance of wounding them. And also, again, a lot of the units in here have ways to spread that afflicted keyword, which means not only are they tougher than you, now their guns, which might be equivalent to yours, are easier at wounding you. So that's how they work. That is basically how this plays out. Their detachments, they have the Virulent Vectorium, which allows you to make your objectives sticky. And when you think Nurgle and sticky, ew, that could be any number of bodily secretions. Also, the objective markers give off Nurgle's Gift as if they were Death Guard models. So when someone gets near an objective you've controlled, they start suffering the symptoms of your plague that you decide to infect them with. And that, again, is just the good all-around detachment for them. There's Mortarion's Hammer, which is the vehicle-focused detachment to represent the Land Raiders, Rhinos, and tanks that Plague Marines may be riding in. And they get to inflict the afflicted status on a number of units that are more than 12 inches away from the rest of your army. So especially early on in the game, you can just start like bombarding people with afflicted, and how many you get to do depends on how big the game is. So in your average game, it's going to be like 2 units a turn. Plus, again, all the other ways you have to apply afflicted. And again, this one is also good with vehicles, so you tank up and roll out with this one. Champions of Contagion, which has been a very popular one. Virulent Victorium is also popular, but Champions of Contagion was really good for a while in competitive play. This one lets you pick an extra one of those debuffs, so you get to have 2 debuffs on your Nurgle's Gift. And also Death Guard has a lot of characters that provide very specific add-ons and abilities. This one has upgrades for all of them and even lets them move between units, which is something characters normally cannot do. Like if a character has lost their unit or you just have it rolling solo, you can have them join another unit. So it's a very flexible detachment, and also just makes plagues that much nastier. Then we get to one that is interesting, and this one is a pattern we are going to see in these next 4 armies, and that is the Taliban Summoners. And the reason I say this follows a pattern is this is the one detachment where you get to include Nurgle demons. There is a small set of Nurgle demons included in this book, and in all 4 of these, there are the god-appropriate demon units available. And in one detachment in each book, you are allowed to bring those demons into your army. And most of them have an ability, not all, but most of them have an ability that say, like, when a demon unit is within so many inches of one of your non-demon units, the demon unit gets, like, whatever your faction's ability is. And then when your non-demon units are within so many inches of your demon units, they get a bonus too. And so in this one, it is when your Nurgle demon units is within 7 inches of a normal Death Guard unit, they get Nurgle's Gift. So, and 7 is important because 7 is one of Nurgle's numbers. Like all the gods have a particular number. For Nurgle gets 2 numbers because Nurgle is special. Nurgle gets 3 and 7. But yeah, whenever like your demons are within 7 inches of your non-demons, they get Nurgle's Gift and they give off plague like everyone else. When your Death Guard unit is within 7 inches of a demon unit, which they're going to be because they're obviously giving the ability to the other one, then that Death Guard unit has 3 extra inches of contagion range, which means by the end of the game, that's a 12-inch bubble off of every unit of plague, assuming that there's a demon nearby. And this one, like the stratagems are built around like trying to find synergy between the demons and the non-demon units. And you can include up to half your army as demons. Now, this is weird because once upon a time, and we're going to get to the Chaos Demon army as a whole near the end, you could just mix demons in with any of the Chaos armies. Now you can only do it with a couple. You cannot do it with Death Guard, and Death Guard only have 1 detachment, can combine them in. So it's actually less flexible than it used to, which is kind of sad.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting choice, and in this one, like I feel like the 2 halves play well together in this particular army.
Yeah, I think in general, these demon detachments work pretty well with the current design philosophy of trying to keep each army a little bit more siloed. But yeah, it definitely doesn't have as much flexibility as it did in older editions.
Right. And then there's the Shamble Rot Vectorium, which, did you want to play Zombie Apocalypse? Because this is how you play Zombie Apocalypse. For one thing, your Poxwalkers, which is what we call these plague zombies, gain battle lines. You can have up to 6 units of them, and they can also get really large. They can go up to 20. So you could have 120 zombies, but that's not all, because depending on how big the game is, on various turns, you get extra units of Poxwalkers just joining your army in reserves. Yeah, you can just, again, one of those, like, just flood the board with slow-moving zombies. Now, that is one thing I do want to remark about this army. It is slow. Like, everything here moves 5 inches on average. Their vehicles and a few other things do move faster, but this is, like, foot slogging, this is a slower army. So, because, you're mostly rotten. It's hard to move quickly.
Yep. And
kind of outside of the plague zombies, the army does also tend to be very elite and high cost, low model count.
Mm-hmm.
There was a period there where they were trying to find ways to balance them before the codex came out, and they were making them very inexpensive point wise. And there was some complaint like, oh, you're making this into a non-elite horde power armor army. They fixed that and in fact made them too good. So they've kind of toned that back down. But yeah, otherwise this is because they are tougher. Yeah, this does lean into being more of a semi-elite army. And then in last from the Codex is the Death Lord's Chosen, which is really meant to, like, this is the Terminator detachment. And in the Death Guard, Terminators are traditionally bodyguards. So this is like characters and Terminators. Also, having Mortarion in this army is in this particular force is not uncommon. In your opponent's turn, you roll 2d6 for each unit that has the afflicted status applied to it. You subtract 1 from the result if the unit's below half strength. So they're more likely to roll low if they're below half strength, which means they're already near death. If the result is 6 or less on 2d6, so 7, so like if you roll a 7, which is the average roll, and they're below half strength, this will happen. Otherwise, you got to roll low. They take mortal wounds. So you want to spread affliction as much as possible, but you're also using Terminators, which are even tougher, as in they're coming in at like toughness 7. And they can deep strike, which kind of helps cover the slow mobility of the army. So another like tough detachment to deal with. And then finally, there was their Grotmus detachment from last year, the Fly-Blown Host, which is focused on non-Poxwalker infantry, and it gives all their non-Poxwalker infantry scouts, so they get extra movement at the beginning of the game, and stealth, which makes them harder to hit because they are so covered in flies you can't see them. That one is actually a neat detachment to play as well.
Yep.
So yeah, if you are into an army that is just tough and wears their opponent down and is just painful for your opponent to even be near, or you want to flood the field with zombies, or if you want an army that actually is also very easy to paint because once you get the basic details down, cover them in wash and make them look dirty and grungy, and you're good.
Right. I think this is also the place that I'll say it. This is also the most feature complete of any of these armies. Yes. It is the oldest of the 4. It was the 8th edition launch army with the Primaris Marines. They have the most characters. They have the most units. They have the most vehicles. They have the most custom units and are just, like I said, more fleshed out than the 3 that we're going to talk about after this. So they are more well-rounded. They have more options. They have more play styles. They have just more toys to play with. Whereas some of these other armies are much newer and haven't gotten like full lines of models yet as we get into like the next one.
Yeah. And when we say newer, so a lot of these have been represented. There have been ways to play these armies in the past, but as cohesive, singular armies, a lot of these you will find are kind of light on options. They aren't as fleshed out as others.
Yeah. You used to be able to make these out of the Chaos Space Marine book, and in 8th edition they split them out into their own factions and unfortunately limited some of the options, so you can't take some of the things that are just based out of the Chaos Space Marine Codex. So you can't, for example, like, oh, I want to put Obliterators in my Death Guard army. Nope, those are Chaos Space Marines. Death Guard don't have those as options. So it limits it a little bit, but I think the trade-off is you get a more flavorful version of these armies and special units that are only available to them, and they do lean into their playstyle a lot more than a general Chaos Space Marine army would.
Right. Now, I mentioned when we were talking about Chaos Space Marines that they could bring in cult troops. They can bring in up to, like, I think, a quarter of the army as cult troops. In this case, means you can add Plague Marines, like their generic battle line troop, into a Chaos Space Marine army. Now, the thing is, that Plague Marine loses Nurgle's Gift, because Nurgle's Gift only works if your army is Death Guard. So all you get is a tough Marine that moves slower and has lethal hits on a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And in fact, the special ability of Plague Marines is granting Afflicted to someone, which will do nothing if you're not playing Death Guard. So maybe not one I would bring into the Chaos Space Marine army, because you have other options for tougher stuff, and I don't know if it's worth it when it doesn't make anything, it doesn't have good synergy. Moving on. So we went from the oldest of the forces to be added to, as a standalone army. Let's go with the newest. Again, in alphabetical order. The Emperor's Children. We touched on them briefly when we were talking about Fabius Bile, but the Emperor's Children were led by their Primarch Fulgrim, and I think they were kind of doomed from the start, honestly. In the lore, something happened with the stability of the Emperor's Children gene seed early on, and it caused them to be, I think, reduced to a fraction of their former strength. They were probably the smallest legion for a while, but even before Fulgrim was found, just because something like happened to them and there were very few survivors. And so they had to prove themselves more. Like they had to show how they could be better, how even though they were reduced in strength, they were no less capable than any other legion. And so that led to a drive for perfection. We've talked about this. This is a bad road to go down. And then they found their Primarch Fulgrim, and Fulgrim was beautiful and intelligent and a fantastic leader and was a very good leader for the Emperor's Children. In fact, the reason they are called the Emperor's Children is because they had proved themselves so well that they were the only legion that was allowed to wear the Emperor's standard, the Aquila, on their chest during the Horus Heresy. Like, that made them special. They had proven themselves to be so capable and so perfect at combat. And so they were focused on being the best duelists, having the most capable force, trying to be the exemplars of everything a Space Marine could be during the Crusade. And this is one of those stories where this is kind of tragic, but kind of also dumb happenstance. They land on a planet. They're fighting against a species called the Lair. And it turns out, what they don't realize at the time, because again, the Emperor didn't tell anybody what the Warp or the Chaos Gods were, the Lair worships Slanesh. And they had, like, while they were clearing the planet, and basically committing a genocide against the Lair, Fulgrim goes into one of their temples and finds a sword, and it's a very well-made sword. Now, Fulgrim already has a sword. It was a gift from his brother Ferrus Manus. They had actually crafted things for each other. So Ferrus Manus made a sword for him. He made a hammer for Ferrus Manus. They got along really great. They were the closest of brothers. And he's like, well, this sword's really cool, and I feel like I should take it. And he did, and that was a bad idea because the sword was possessed and started corrupting him. And by extension, his entire legion, just because he had the stupid sword around. And eventually, like, the whole legion just went more and more obsessive and excessive. And that's when Fabius Bile got into experimenting with, I could make Space Marines better, and started experimenting and doing surgery on them to improve their ability to perceive sensations and to make sounds that could break people's bones. And eventually they just go insane. There's no great buildup. Like, the tragedy is Fulgrim found a sword that wasn't his and couldn't put it down. And eventually he is possessed. There's a whole thing with he gets replaced with a demon and stuck in a painting. Yes, I know, it's ridiculous. And then eventually breaks out of the painting, but he's like a full-on demon Primarch now and is fully ascended, and he's a giant, like, half snake, half person.
As you do.
As you do. And by the time the Emperor's Children get to Terra during the Horus Heresy, they're not even focused on fighting. They're just busy rounding up civilians and snorting them, like reducing them down to drugs and taking them. Like, they've just gone utterly insane and lost the plot at that point. And so this is a legion that focuses on speed and martial prowess and selfishness. There is not very much synergy to be found in this army at all. There's a little bit here and there, but this army does not support itself. They do not support each other in any way. And in fact, their army rule, Thrill Seekers, is a very simple rule, but it has restrictions on it. It lets you advance or fall back and still shoot and charge, which makes you very mobile. You can just keep moving. But there's two restrictions. One, you can't target a unit that you started off in engagement range. So if you fall back from someone, you can't shoot them. You have to shoot somebody else. If you fall back, you can't charge them again. You have to charge somebody else. You already fought them. You've had that sensation. You don't want that. You want something new. And the other thing is, you cannot target a unit that was the target of another unit's charge or attack this phase. If you want to fall back and shoot, or advance and shoot, or advance and charge or anything, you can't team up, because you all have to prove that you're the best. You don't need anyone else. You will do this on your own. This makes for a very odd play style where you have to kind of pick and choose. Now, fortunately, it only matters if you advance and fall back. If you're just moving forward normally, you can fight the same thing. You can double up. But basically, it's like, do you want to double up? You can't use your army rule. Your army rule wants you all to be selfish, prideful pricks.
Yep.
This is also an army, because it is the newest army, it has the least options, and sometimes in boggling ways, where there are units that would be available to anybody but you for reasons. We don't know why yet. We have not figured it out. So you have the smallest pool of units to build from. Some units that you do have only kind of sort of fit the feel of the army otherwise. So it's an odd army to play. It's a tricky army to play.
GW does this with new armies sometimes, where they will release half of an army, or like the core units, but like not some of the like cooler special units. Leagues of Votann went through this. World Leaders went through this, which we'll talk about later. So they are still in that very early stage where they are not feature complete yet. Like they basically, this is the beta version of like the Codex almost.
Mm-hmm.
When they get an update in 11th edition, I would expect they'll get a bunch more new unit options. They'll get like tweak some of the rules to make their playstyle like work a little bit more. But right now, yeah, they're just in an awkward space because they are. I mean, this army came out in what, February?
Yeah,
like,
this army's less than a year old.
This army is incredibly brand new. And, you know, they didn't want to drop 60 units or whatever for a full army all at once. They want to spread that out and get Emperor's Children players to buy armies over multiple years. So you wind up in an awkward spot where you don't have everything that you fully need to make this I think in a very narrow way, this army can be effective, but this army does not have the breadth and variety of playstyles that others do.
No, it does not. And while, like, I think that is reflected in the fact that while they're like 6 detachments, 7 now, there's still like competitively there's only one that gets played.
Yep.
You know, the army rule doesn't lend well to a lot of flexibility necessarily, because it does kind of railroad you into certain behaviors. Like the detachments, they're fine. Like it's not a bad army, it's just kind of a one-note army at this point.
Yeah.
And partially that is because it is very new. It's also the only of these 4 armies where you do have your Primarch, but unlike the other 3, he does not help the rest of your army in any way. And that is by design. Again, these are all selfish pricks. They're all terrible people. And even Fulgrim, like, he is only about doing things for himself. And in fact, in the storyline, he could care less about the rest of his legion. He's doing his own thing. He's chasing his own kinds of sensations. You know, this is an army that, you know, wants you to just be focused on everybody being the best at all times. So their detachments, again, you start off kind of the generic one, the Mercurial Host, which is just about re-rolling advance rolls. Like, that's their ability. They re-roll advance rolls, and they're generally good for Emperor's Children. They do kind of like the basic things, make some of their units a little bit better, but not anything in particular, just generally good in Emperor's Children stuff. There's the Peerless Bladesman, which is all about being in close combat. In fact, they have a unit called the Flawless Blades, who are supposed to be the most perfect duelists and fighters in the galaxy. In this detachment, anytime one of your Emperor's Children unit is selected to fight, if they charged, which generally means they charged the one unit by themselves, they get both sustained hits and lethal hits. So they get more attacks, and their attacks auto wound. Not bad.
Yeah.
You know, and this is an army that does lean a bit more into melee, although one of their main units that they are known for is a shooting unit. But this one is more about like just getting into melee and being the best sword fighter you can be. There's Rapid Evisceration, which is all about transports. Every time one of your models makes an attack, and they just updated it to say if it is a transport or it got out of a transport, they reroll hits and wounds of 1. So this is roll up, pop out of transport, fight things, get back in transport, fight again. A lot of synergy here between like vehicles and infantry. This is the one, if I'm playing Emperor's Children, this is generally the one I lean into because I like this play style. And plus, I have a lot of vehicles already for my Emperor's Children, and so I'm going to try to use them. There's the Carnival of Excess. This is our, look, we have demons available. And again, you can take about half your army of Slaanesh demons. And this one is if they are within 6 inches of each other, which 6 is the number for Slaanesh, then both sides are considered empowered. If they're empowered, their weapons have sustained hits 1, and if it already had sustained hits 1, it crits on 5s. Which can be really nasty because, like, I've played against a Emperor's Children player who was playing this, and they were using Noise Marines with a Lord Cacophonous who gives all their weapons sustained hits 1. And so everything he was damn near doubling the number of attacks just by having demons nearby. But yeah, it can be very, very effective, but it does require you to take Slaanesh demons. And Slaanesh demons, this is not Nurgle. Everything here tends to be a little bit squishier. And then you get the detachment that pretty much everyone uses competitively, and that is Coterie of the Conceited. And this one I think is also one of the more interesting ones to play. When I first read it, I didn't like it, but the more I've kind of warmed up to it more. And the idea is you are pledging to like show how awesome you are. So if your warlord's on the table, you pledge to Slaanesh how many units you're going to kill this round. If you killed that many, you get points equal to the number that you pledged. So if you say, I'm going to kill 1 unit, I'm pretty sure I'm going to kill a unit this round. If you kill a unit this round, great, you get a pledge point. If you say, I'm going to kill 3 units, and you kill 3 units, great, you get 3 pledge points. Pledge points add up to give you increasing benefits. So it starts off, if you get it, when you're at 1 packed point, you reroll hits of 1, reroll wounds of 1 at 3, get lethal hits and sustained hits in melee on 5, and on a 7-up, you crit on 5. So again, you get better at melee as you go on. Here's the thing. If you pledge and you don't make that number, your warlord takes D3 mortal wounds and you get no pact points at all. So it's kind of a tricky one. You need to know what your army can do and like where to apply damage the most to try to finish off units and get that pledge going. But apparently it works very well competitively because that is like what people have been playing.
It kind of makes sense when you like describe it that way because Math Hammer nerds seem to be the ones that play competitively. So yeah, this feels like a Math Hammer nerd's dream.
It's like if I know what this unit is likely to do and I pick the right units to go against, yeah, you can basically math your way to victory. Obsessive math. And finally, of the Codex detachments, there's Slaanesh's Chosen, which basically only one character at a time, starting with your Warlord, can be your favored champion. And the first time one of your character units destroys an enemy unit, nope, they're the favored one now. And when you're favored, you can reroll wound rolls. It's fine, it's thematic.
Yeah.
And then they just added a new one again in the last week or so, right when they added the Nightmare Hunt. The Court of the Phoenician, which basically works under the same rules as Thrill Seekers, but also gives you +1 strength and +1 armor penetration when you charged and didn't charge somebody you were in engagement range with and didn't charge somebody that somebody else charged. So like it's the same restrictions, but your melee gets better. Also, it gives Fulgrim a chance to use cheaper stratagems on a couple of things to address the fact that he has the largest base of damn near anything in the game, and moving through terrain is hard for him.
Yeah.
So they're really trying to get people to use Fulgrim because, again, he is not a force multiplier. He is his own thing, and he is hard to use with the current like standard table setups just because he is so very large.
Cool model, though.
Cool model. I have one that I need to assemble and paint, and I'm going to have to paint him in sub-assemblies because it's the only way to get all the colors right on him, because there's a certain style you want to do with him, and it's tricky. This army frustrates me personally because I used to be a big Emperor's Children player when you could play them out of the Chaos Space Marine Codex, and they completely changed up how they play and invalidated like a bunch of the units I have. So that was tough. But if you're coming at this new, it's an interesting army to start with. There's a holiday pack that came out, which I don't know if it's still available in their store, but I've seen it in stores. And they've got a good combat patrol that pairs with it very nicely.
Well, and these are all like the newest models in the game. Like they're all less than a year old. Like the models themselves are fantastic, flavorful.
Oh yeah,
awesome.
The models are,
yeah.
Yeah, I've built and painted like the launch box that they did for this army, and they're fantastic models, and oh my god, so customizable. I did the calculations to figure out how many unique Noise Marines you could make out of a box, and it was something like 2 million. Like when you figure out all the potential combinations, it's like there are more potential Noise Marines that can be made out of a box of Noise Marines than there are Noise Marines in 40k lore, just out of one box. I love that. Like we hadn't had that kind of customizability for a long time, and now we do. Again, so,
for sure.
So it is a fantastic army to build and paint, especially if you like pink. Although you are not limited to pink. Like a lot of these armies, pink is kind of the generic look for this army, but there's so many other ways. Like you want to do, I've seen some schemes that they have in here of like white and gold, or just straight up just pure gold, just pure excessive, look at me how shiny I am kind of color. If there's any number of color schemes you could do with this army, and it would all look fantastic. Just go bold, go bright, go bold, go intense, because that would be very much on brand. Moving on, we've got the Thousand Sons. Thousand Sons, that is S-O-N-S, not S-U-N-S. So these are like sons as in children. The Thousand Sons are the legion led by the Primarch Magnus the Red. Magnus was the one very blatantly psychic Primarch. Psychic by design. The Emperor had actually designed him to be psychic when he was genetically creating the Primarchs. And Magnus took that as a duty. He studied sorcery and esoteric knowledge. He's also a Cyclops, although originally it was like he was missing one eye. But we'll get to what happens to him later in a bit. But he was a fervent defender of the idea that psychic powers and psychic phenomenon and sorcery could be used to better the Empire. And of course, he had not been told about Tzeentch because the Emperor makes bad decisions. And so over time, his chapter devoted themselves. They had the highest number of librarians of, Marine psychers of any legion. And he was very much on the forefront of the argument that librarians should be used. Psychic phenomenon should be used. But over time, there were issues with psychic powers that are starting to be noticed. Although, like, we hadn't reached like full on demon incursions yet, but things were starting to happen. And there was a push against that. And so there was a Council of Nicaea where it was determined that Space Marines should not use librarians. Psychic powers should not be used. They were just too dangerous. And Magnus was not happy about this, but he said, okay, I'll follow the rules. And then he went home and immediately started breaking the rules and using sorcery. And here's the thing. He was very loyal. He just thought he knew better. Like, this was his job. This is the thing he was meant to do. So he's like, surely I can find a way to use it that'll be totally fine.
Surely the leopards won't eat my face.
Yeah, exactly. The giant bird-like pink and blue leopards will not eat my face. He also had an issue with his legion was more prone to mutation, possibly because they were more psychic than others. But he figured that's a problem we can fix. We'll fix that eventually. And he found out about the heresy. In fact, in one of the books, he actually talks to Lorgar, like in the warp, and is like, no, look, I know what you're doing. This is bad. You should not do that. You can't trust these warp spirits. They're a bad idea. Don't work with them. But he hears it, but he learns the heresy, and he's like, I have to warn the Emperor, and I have no way I can get anything there in time. I know, I'll just psychically manifest inside wherever the Emperor is, and I'll tell him what's going on, and he'll be so happy that I told him. And so he did, while the Emperor was working on a project to use the webway so humanity wouldn't have to use the warp. The webway is another one of these like alternate dimensions kind of between reality and the warp. And by doing so, not only did he break the webway project, but also cause tears in the Imperial Palace that were letting demons in.
Oops.
The Emperor was not happy that Magnus had chosen to do this. So he sent a message. Also, Magnus didn't get the message across that the heresy was going on. So at this point, the Emperor is not aware of what's going on, at least as far as we know. And so he's like, okay, I need to send a message. Tell the Space Wolves that I need them to grab Magnus and bring him before me in person so I can talk to him and tell him what he did wrong. Anyone who tells you Magnus did nothing wrong is wrong. Magnus decided he knew better and made a mistake. However, the Emperor also made a mistake in that he sent that message to Horus because he thought Horus was still loyal. So Horus decided, I can kill two birds with one stone, and says, okay, Space Wolves, the Emperor told you need to go kill the Thousand Sons. And so that takes the Thousand Sons and the Space Wolves off the board for a bit. The Space Wolves are like, well, okay, the Emperor told us we got to go do it. And they go to the home planet of the Thousand Sons and proceed to start slaughtering everyone. And finally, Magnus is like, I got to get my people out of here. This is bad. I'm going to look through my sorcery and see how I can get us out of here, and ends up making a deal with Tzeentch to pull the rest of his legion away and get them somewhere else. And right into the Eye of Terror, and they've all joined forces with Tzeentch, because Tzeentch is the only one who would offer them a deal, and Tzeentch knew it was a bad deal. Also, Tzeentch, being the god of change, is like, oh yeah, and all those legionaries that mutate, guess what? They're going to do that a lot more now, to the point where they're dying. Like, it's killing them. So eventually, one of their lead sorcerers, Ahriman, is like, well, you know what? I can fix this. I have studied spells, and I have found a spell.
Surely I know better.
Surely I know better. Like, that hubris is the sin of the Thousand Sons.
Right. And he fixed the problem.
He did fix the glitch.
He did.
He cast a spell called the Rubric of Ahriman, and it's like, okay, so everyone who's psychic hasn't been mutating, but all the non-psychic ones have been mutating badly. So I'm just going to make them not mutate anymore. And the spell worked by turning them all into dust, sealing their armor, kind of leaving, who knows what's really happened to their souls, although I think it's been established that if they get brought back somehow through like space magic, they're back to themselves. But yeah, basically, yeah, the entire legion is sorcerers and dust in cans. But the cans can still move around and shoot and follow orders. So
yeah,
the Thousand Sons are the legion that are all in on Tzeentch, and especially all in on sorcery, because the only ones who are still around and actually like sentient and cognizant are the sorcerers. So the sorcerers are running everything. And in fact, their army rule is Cabal of Sorcerers. You have 4 powers that you can use, and you can try each one once. It used to be you could try them until they failed, but now you can try each one once, and each one has a difficulty that you try to roll on 2d6. You can choose to roll 3d6 if you want to make it more likely to happen. Plus, all of the powers have an ability of like, hey, if you roll really well, you get an even better version of it. So, for example, Twist of Fate, which is like one of the big ones for them. Select an enemy unit within 24 inches. If you successfully cast this on a 9 or better by rolling 2d6 and getting a 9 or higher, you improve your armor penetration against them by 1. But if you get a 12 or better, you get an armor penetration better by 2, which in many cases means they don't get an armor save, which can be deadly. However, if you roll doubles or triples, you then take damage before the spell goes off. So you might kill yourself casting the spell. Maybe. You know, like, this is an entire army that's just like, what? I'm going to cast a spell. What's the worst that could happen? That's the entire history of the Thousand Sons, manifested in a single rule. Their detachments are the Grand Coven, which makes all, like, 3 times per game you select an ability, and that ability is basically like one of these 3 abilities is makes your psychic attacks better in some way, which is basically just going to be like for your sorcerers. Everything else is just there to support the sorcerers in that case. There's the Change Host of Deceit, which is their demon detachment. Again, they can have up to half the army as demons. And it basically says when your Thousand Sons are within 6 inches of Tzeentch demons, they have a 4-up invulnerable save against range attacks, which is really nice. When your demons are within 6 inches of your Thousand Sons, they have the Cabal of Sorcerers ability and can try to cast the psychic powers too if they are psychers, which they only have a few psychers that they can take in that army, but it's still a thing you can do. There's the Warp Meld Pact, which is all about your mutants, because Tzeentch doesn't have cultists. They have weird bird people mutants called Zangors. When Zangors or I think Chaos Spawn are also listed as mutants, they can basically suffer mortal wounds in exchange for either being harder to wound or being more likely to wound somebody else. So they can kind of do the Dark Pacts thing, except the Dark Pact always goes badly for you. You will always take the damage. There's the Rubrique Phalanx, which is the one I like the most, which is built around all those, the dust in cans. Because basically it's like all your Terminators and your power armor troops are harder to wound, with light weaponry. Anything that is only damage 1, you get a better save against. Bolter Fire and Lasgun Fire from like the Imperium, you don't care. Shrug it off. You're not flesh anyway. There's the Warp Forged Cabal, which is their vehicle detachment, which says, hey, if your vehicles can re-roll like a hit, a wound, or a damage roll, but if they're near a sorcerer, they can reroll all 3. Only thing is, if they're also near a sorcerer and they get destroyed, they're more likely to blow up because crazy Tzeentch fire. And then they have their Grotmus detachment, the Hex Warp Thrall Band, which is what I will call a board control detachment. There's a number of these, and we'll see them in other detachments, where if you can, like, your deployment zone is always considered your area of control. If you control more of the objective markers in the area that's neither player's deployment zone, then that becomes part of your area of control. And then if you control more objectives in your opponent's deployment zone, that becomes your area of control. And the Hexwarp Thrall Band says, hey, if you're in your area of control, your psychic attacks are like +1 to wound. Yay. Like, there's not enough psychic. Unfortunately, this army doesn't have enough psychic attacks to really make that worthwhile. There's other detachments here are better. But if you want to play a crazy army of space wizards, like, this is the army to go with. I will say they are probably one of the hardest to paint because there's a lot of tiny blue and yellow lines. Also, if you like space Egyptians, like, this is the Space Egypt designed army. Like, it's a neat looking army, and this army is more fleshed out than Emperor's Children, to be sure. You have so many different kinds of sorcerers. You have like 5 generic sorcerers, because you have, well, I don't want to get into a book review, but like 5 generic sorcerers plus 2 generic demon princes plus 2 named characters plus, like, you've got a Zangor caster, and then you've just got like all the little casters who are sergeants in your other squad, because remember, your guys in power armor can't do anything unless the sorcerer is leading them around. So you have a lot of casters in this army. It can be a lot of fun to play, and it's the one that's going to get you the closest to feeling like you're playing like an old school psychic army. So it's a neat one. It's just, there's a number of restrictions, and it is still, even with that, kind of a one-note army, because, like, if you don't like playing sorcerers, too bad, you picked the wrong army. And then finally, of our 4 Chaos God specific armies, we have the World Eaters. This is Kevin's favorite army.
The best legion, yes.
The best legion. And in my notes, I said the strategy for this army, hit thing with stick.
I mean, yeah, no, it's ABP, always be punching.
Always be punching. ABC, always be charging, right?
Yeah.
The World Eaters, I'm going to say, I think of all 4 of these, and we've talked about this when we did our full book reviews, definitely the most tragic of the legions.
For sure.
Their Primarch is Angron. Their legion, even before Angron was found, they were already known for being violent troops that you could just send into an area and they would just show absolutely no quarter and just get into melee and just be absolutely violent. Kind of like the early Blood Angels were.
Yeah.
Angron himself rolled really badly on the dice to determine what planet he landed on. And unlike a lot of the other Primarchs where he became like the leader of the planet and ushered it into a golden age, he landed in a gladiator pit and became a gladiator slave. But of course, being a Primarch, he was like the most powerful gladiator slave, but he was still a gladiator slave. And the beings that basically ran the world and, forced these slaves to fight each other wired his brain with a thing called the butcher's nails, which made it so that he could only feel any sort of joy or peace when he was killing things. And they slowly burrowed their way deeper and deeper into his brain. But eventually, he kind of pulled a Spartacus and led a slave revolt and tried to fight off and defeat the forces that were enslaving them. And unfortunately, much like with Spartacus, it didn't go well in the end. And right on the eve of the final battle, which he knew he and his compatriots were going to die, the Emperor shows up. And the Emperor's like, I've got a whole legion of warriors who I want you to lead in this great crusade to take the galaxy for humanity. You want to join me? And Angron basically looked at him and said, no, go kick rocks. I've got a war to fight and I've got to go die with my friends now because I owe it to them. We bled together. So right before the final battle, the Emperor just teleports him off the planet and leaves.
Maybe the Emperor should stop interfering with revenge plots.
One would think that would really help because that seems to never end well. And so the Emperor absolutely screwed Angron over. Even it's like, well, I didn't want to let him die. And also, like, Angron didn't want any help either. So Angron's pride kind of got in the way too. But yeah, in the end, like, he never forgave the Emperor for that. He always hated the Emperor and he hated his legion. Every time his legion tried to connect to him, he'd just kill anybody who got close to him.
He seems like he's maybe an angry person.
Yeah. Again, no subtlety in naming. But eventually, one of the leaders of the Legion, Karn, he was one of the first to actually kind of connect with Angron, at least, and not get killed. But the rest of the Legion also decided, hey, you know what would be great? What if we were like Dad and we had the psychic surgery to make us angry all the time? All in a desire to be closer to their father. Nothing bad came of this decision ever. Oh, wait,
Yeah,
this is
it's
40K.
great.
Everything came bad from this decision. They eventually all became a crazed band of murderers. There's even a story where it's like somebody examines Angron and is like, you know, we could try to remove the butcher's nails, but it'll probably kill him. And the Emperor's like, nah, let's leave him in. I don't want to risk killing him, and I guess I can kind of use him the way he is.
Nothing bad will come of this decision.
Nothing bad. No, everything bad came of that decision. So, yeah, in the end, Angron is the first to become a demon Primarch thanks to Lorgar. Utterly insane for bloodshed. The rest of the Legion follows suit soon after, and yeah, by the time of the heresy, they're utterly insane. Angron could not care less about his Legion because he just hates everything, but he does inspire them at least, so he is still kind of a force multiplier on the board in the rules. But yeah, the World Eaters are not a subtle army. They want to run up and rend your face because blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne.
Yep.
I will say, of all four of these, I think they have the neatest army rule. The Nurgle one's cool. The Tzeentch one is cool. The Slaanesh one is okay. But this one is the Casino of Khorne, the Blessings of Khorne.
Yeah.
Where you roll 8 dice because 8 is his number. You look for doubles or triples, and you can take up to 2 of those sets and use that to activate certain blessings, which could be anything from re-rolling charges to having sustained hits or lethal hits or having devastating wounds against infantry. Or if you have Angron in your army, possibly bringing him back from the dead.
Yeah. No, and the great thing about this, too, with 8 dice is you are guaranteed to always have at least 1 double, usually 2, or a triple. So you are either getting 2 of the benefits or you're getting 1 of the really good ones. So there's no downside. Like, it is a little bit random, but they're all good. They're all beneficial. They're all things that if you were playing this army, correctly and trying to assault and get into melee, they're all valuable. They're all really good.
As far as your detachments, there's the Berserker Warband. I hope you like playing Blood Angels, because you just played Blood Angels. It's the same as the Liberator Assault Force, +1 attack and +2 strength on the charge.
Blood Angels are playing like World Eaters. Let's just... Come on. We said World Eaters play like Blood Angels in the Space Marine episode. Blood Angels play like World Eaters, since this is the proper Chaos episode.
Well, we did always say that... we did say that Khorne was always mad that he didn't get the Blood Angels, because they were...
Absolutely.
Because if you read their backstories, it's like before their Primarchs are found, they basically are going along the same path.
Mm-hmm.
It's just one of them. And actually, it's not even that Sanguinius landed on a good world. He landed on a crap world too. He was able to lead that world and be better rather than Angron just got the worst roll of the dice and the worst luck. And it is probably the most tragic of stories. Yeah. But yeah, they're very similar otherwise. You've got the Cult of Blood, which is all about using your cultists, which in this army are like jackals and goremongers, and also having them near monsters or giant things, which inspire them.
I have not played this detachment yet, but I desperately want to. I have a Lord of Skulls, I have the Chiton, I want to build my Brass Scorpion and put those 3 models out there and then just flood the board with cultists.
Yeah. It's like you pick an idle ability in your command phase. So it's like three times per turn, you pick an ability. It's like they get invulnerable saves, or they're better advancing and charging, or better in hitting and wounding. So it's like these are the idols we worship. We will let them lead us into battle, and we are inspired. It's kind of fun. Then we've got our demon detachment, the Khorne Demonkin, the army that originally was your army, Kevin. And this one does not play like the other demon detachments. These don't care if you're near each other at all.
Yeah, it doesn't play like the old Khorne Demonkins, which I do still miss. But it does, it synergizes around using the units to kill things.
Right.
And I think it still works really well for what it does. Just it's not quite what it used to be.
Right. Basically, the idea is whenever one of your units kills something, kills another enemy unit, you roll a d6. On a 3-up, you get a Blood Tithe point. And then in your command phase, you can spend some of your Blood Tithe points, and they activate abilities primarily for your demons for the rest of the battle, which would be for 5 points. Hey, they get Blessings of Khorne now for the rest of the game, and they get to play doubles too.
Yep. So no, it's still it's a very useful detachment. I've seen a lot of people have a lot of success with it, especially since the Khorne demon units that you have access to can get work done. Like throwing Scarbrand into this army is disgusting.
Right.
So, it could definitely, it gives you access to some really good units, and it fits the play style. With some of the other demons, like the demons do different things than the legionnaires do. In this army, they all do exactly the same thing. They are all as subtle as you would expect.
Right. You've got the possessed slaughter band, which is basically take your possessed units, which for world eaters are 8-bound and exalted 8-bound, which is just what it sounds like. We took 8 corn demons and jammed them into one person at a time.
Yeah. They are the best units in this army, by the way. Like, you will take a unit of 3 of them and you will just rip through blobs of troops in melee. They are so good.
Yeah, and this detachment basically says, hey, those world eater possessed units, when they get shot, if you lost a model, they get to move towards somebody. They get to like run at somebody.
So this army is incredibly fast. Like, 8-bound, I think, move either 8 or 9 inches. So, hey, what if you got there faster? What if you spent less time running at things because you were just able to move? It's really good.
Yeah. And then last for the Codex is the Gortrak Onslaught, which is their transport detachment, which basically says when one of your units gets out of a transport, they are +1 to charge, and they have their weapons are of lance, which makes them +1 to wound on the charge. I don't think they really need the speed buff from being in transports, but
the way that I've seen people use this one is if you really want to play a corn army that's not melee focused or as melee focused, like as far as shooting, land raiders, stuff like that. This is a fun one because you can still have the extra punch of melee and moving around, but have extra shooting in there. I have never played this one because you frankly don't need the assist on the movement. So it's a cool idea, but I think there's plenty on their own.
And I will say that their vehicles are worse at shooting in that they have their ballistic skill is worse than the equivalent units from like Chaos Space Marines, but everything is rapid fire, which means it's not about how well you shoot, it's about how many you shoot.
Yeah, basically they turned it into orc shooting, and I'm totally okay with that.
And then finally, their Grotmus detachment from last year, the Vessels of Wrath, which basically says you have a number of characters, not named characters, but like characters and like sergeants or leaders of other units. Those units can get an extra blessing.
And they get to pick it, which is the nice thing.
Yeah, you get to pick one of the blessings.
This detachment is basically, hey, everything good about like the Berserker Warband, but you get to pick instead. Like, it's so good.
Yeah. So yeah, if you just want an army that is painted like red and gold primarily and runs at things and hits them with chain axes and just tries to take their heads and just like no subtlety, no careful positioning, just go for the charge all the time.
If you like screaming at things in melee and don't want to play orcs, this is your army.
Yeah.
But why would you not want to play orcs?
You know what? I mean, fair. But if you don't want to paint that many models, because the difference here is that in an average orc army, you're painting hundreds of models. Here, you're painting like 60 or 70. So, yeah. But otherwise, it is basically just an orcs at this point.
Yeah, pretty much.
And I'm fine with that.
All right. Now, so that kind of wraps us up for Chaos Space Marine style armies. Like we've covered everything that is made with standard Chaos Power Armor. But we've got 2 more that I want to talk about. One is something that could not be more different, and that is Chaos Knights. Without getting into too much detail, because we will go into a little bit more detail when we get to our last episode, which is all the other Imperium units, there are these things called Imperial Knights, and they are giant robots. There's an entire thing with like them being members of knightly orders on their various planets and having barons and lords and things like that. But invariably, as all things do, if you throw enough spikes on something, it becomes chaos. And in this case, during the Horus Heresy, there were a number of knight households who, were lending their forces to the Great Crusade as they were discovered, because, like the humanity would show up and they're like, hey, look, it's humans again. Yeah, we're totally on board. We're completely loyal. But some of them, they swore oaths to particular leaders, and in case they had joined on with any of the traitor legions, they also went traitor. Or there was also a rift in the Mechanicum, and half the Mechanicum went traitor, and so anybody who was joined with the Mechanicum also went traitor. And the Imperium doesn't tend to forget those kinds of slights, so a number of knight houses ended up just going in with chaos. And so these are the evil giant stompy robots with spikes. And when I say giant, they are quite large, and your army might only be 5 models, but they are going to be very big models with lots of with high toughness and lots of wounds. I mean, your standard knight body is tougher than most tanks, has twice as many wounds as most tanks, probably twice as many guns as most tanks. There are knights that are focused on close combat. There are knights that are completely focused on shooting. There are even smaller knights called, in this army, they're called war dogs, which are basically used like packs of dogs would be used when hunting to just like unleash, the dogs with the bees in their mouth. So when they bark bees at you. But yeah, the idea is they are big, scary, stompy robots. And the scary part comes in with their army rule, the Harbingers of Dread, which give you a number of abilities that are all built around forcing your opponent to make battle shock tests and making their leadership worse, or being better against targets that are battle shocked. So they always have an aura of 9 inches of your leadership is worse by 1 if you are near me. And then they can have an aura that doubles that. Army rules that anytime they attack somebody who's battle shocked, they're better at wounding or better at hitting, or maybe they're harder to be hit. But you start off with 1 that is always that aura, and then on your first, third, and fifth turns you get additional ones. So basically the dread amps up as the game goes on. So they're called dread abilities. And so you can really start to disrupt your opponent's strategy by basically being big, scary robots in their face. This also is one of the few armies that can just ally into anything that is chaos. If you are playing an army that has the chaos keyword, then you can include a Titanic Chaos Knight, so one of the very big Chaos Knights, or up to 3 of the War Dogs, the smaller ones, in your army. So you can always splash one of these in if you just need something big and stompy.
And who doesn't?
Yeah, and they're fun. Like, I'll admit, playing with knights, I use knights occasionally in my Imperium armies, and it's fun. It's like, this can be a tricky army to play against, because if you cannot deal with big vehicles, you can have a lot of problems, so you have to figure out ways to outscore them. So it's an army that not everybody likes to play against, but if you know it's coming, if you can give your opponent warning, if you're doing a casual game, like, hey, do you mind if I bring a knight? I think it could be kind of fun. It can be a fun experience to try to work around it. Their detachments, the Traitorous Lance gives you an extra dread ability, so you pretty much will have almost all of them by the end of the game. There's the Infernal Lance, which basically gives you Dark Pacts. Like, it is effectively the same thing. You make a leadership test in your command phase. If you fail, you take D3 mortal wounds, just like you would if you failed a Dark Pact. And then you get the Empowered status, which you can then spend. You get extra movement, invulnerable save and feel no pain, or have lethal hits or sustained hits, just like you would with the Dark Pact. So if you like playing Chaos Space Marines, but you want to play giant robots, this is basically playing Chaos Space Marines with big giant robots. There's Lords of Dread, which is just about taking big knights. Take 5 big knights and just run the field. And their only ability is they have better objective control on their knights, because they won't have little things to help them hold objectives, and they can make objectives sticky more easily. But they also have the most enhancements, because the idea is you have 5 big guys and they're all going to have their own enhancement and be special. And then there's the Hound Pack Lance, which is Oops All War Dogs, which for a long time was the playstyle for Chaos Knights. They made sure there was a way to still do that, but it's a more interesting way to do it, and I do like that they have more than one playstyle.
Yeah.
And then finally, they have their Grotmus detachment, the Iconoclast Fiefdom, which was a crossover between Chaos Knights and the Damned, so cultists and traitor guardsmen and such. You can take up to a quarter of your army from Damned units, and the thing is, it's kind of like Dark Pacts, except instead of the knights taking damage, you just sacrifice cultist models. Like, if a cultist is within so many inches of one of your knights, kill some cultists and gain sustained or lethal hits.
Again, I don't know why people keep saying that Chaos is the bad guys. They seem perfectly reasonable.
I mean, in this one, at least you have bodies for, holding, doing things with like objectives, because cultists still make objectives sticky, for example.
Yeah.
It's not a very popular one, and I think because it is a little bit of a crossover, but back when that one was released, the Codex wasn't out yet, so there was only the Traitor's Lance style of play. So it was nice to have an alternative. And I still kind of I've got a bunch of cultists and I have some Chaos Knights I need to build, so I think this would be one I might lean into just to see what happens with it. I think it would be fun to play. But yeah, basically Chaos Knights, if you like big stompy robots and you want to do something that does not involve moving a whole lot of little models around and you want to have stuff that just feels scary and powerful, definitely a way to go. And finally, that leaves us with one Chaos Army remaining, and that is the one that is not in a book. It is available as a free download, much like Deathwatch were not available in a book form as a standalone army and then were eventually made into a download. Chaos Demons is an army that has been in the game as a standalone book since, 5th edition? And then we got to 10th edition and everybody was free downloads because they changed the rule set, and eventually it became clear looking at the release schedule that Chaos Demons were not going to get a print upgrade. And that's when we started seeing the Chaos-specific demons getting added to the God-specific Legion books that we saw. So like those demon detachments we've talked about. And that's when Games Workshop said, no, we're just going to go ahead and keep this as a free download for playing pure demon armies. And so it is an army that, unlike Deathwatch, where you had to buy another book still to use it, Chaos Demons, if you have the models, you can just play Chaos Demons. The rules are completely free, which makes it a really awesome choice for newer players. But it's also a harder choice because this army does not play like anything else. You have very little shooting. It's almost entirely melee. And a lot of your stuff is very squishy because it generally only has like invulnerable saves. You're saving most things on like a 5-up, but you're saving everything on a 5-up. And this represents the warp made manifest, all those demonic incursions and warp incursions where like the warp bleeds into real space. This is the army you're playing. Flood the field with demons of all different ilk. You are not limited to God-specific demon armies. You can mix and match and do whatever, although they do have ways to play God-specific. Their army rule is another board control rule. It's called Shadow of Chaos. So again, your deployment zone, your Shadow of Chaos. The middle of the board, control more objectives, it's in your Shadow of Chaos. Opponent's deployment zone, you control more objectives, that's in your Shadow of Chaos. Whenever you're in your Shadow of Chaos, if you ever have to make a battle shock test on your demons, you get +1 to the battle shock roll, so you're less likely to be battle shocked. And if you pass, you restore D3 wounds or D3 models if you pass, if it's like just like a troop unit. Meanwhile, your opponent, if they are in your Shadow of Chaos, or if they're within 6 inches of one of the greater demons, one of the big demons that you can have as a character, then you are -1 to battle shock tests if you're the enemy. And if the enemy unit fails, they take D3 mortals. So basically, if you're in your Shadow of Chaos, your models might come back. If they're in your Shadow of Chaos, they might start losing models just by scaring them. Also, this is an army that is made to be splashed into other armies. And while you cannot do it in the 4 God-specific ones because they can only take demons inside the specific detachments set up for demons, Chaos Knights and generic Chaos Space Marines can include up to a quarter of their army as demons, with the only restriction of you can't have more non-battle line units than battle line units. So you can't have like more characters and add-ons than you can like the base demons for that army, which is generally not a problem. But it was just to kind of make sure people weren't just taking just demon good stuff. But yeah, demons are generally more melee focused, although Tzeentch demons are more shooting focused. And they actually have a pretty solid roster because there are a bunch of units for each god. And then there's some units like Demon Princes and Soul Grinders that are generic. And there also is a character named Be'lakor, who is canonically the first Demon Prince, the first human to, or possibly first living being, but definitely the first human to be raised to demonhood. And he is kind of like Lord of Shadows and also just a catty bitch. Like Be'lakor is the kind of being who will, even if he's working with you, he will screw over your plans if it doesn't work with him enough. If it doesn't benefit him enough, he'll screw you over out of spite. And I kind of respect that, but he's still a jerk.
Respect that level of petty.
Yeah, oh, he's extremely petty. Like he is the ultimate level of petty. But they actually have 6 detachments to choose from. So they've got their demonic incursion detachment, which is kind of their base detachment. The demonic incursion detachment basically says anytime you deep strike unit in, like pretty much all your demons can deep strike because they can just pop into reality whenever they need to. If they're in your shadow of chaos or within 6 inches of one of those greater demons that has the same god keyword as that unit. So like if you have bloodletters and you want to drop them near a bloodthirster, or you have which are corn demons, or for Slanesh, like a keeper of secrets, and you want to drop demonettes near it, they can be set up within 6 inches of enemy models instead of 9 inches of it, which means they're almost guaranteed to be able to get a charge off. And which is good because this is a melee focused army. It allows you more deployment options for Deep Strike, which is good. On the other hand, they also have another generic one called the Shadow Legion, and that represents Be'lakor's army. And Be'lakor is interesting in that he is a Chaos Undivided Demon Prince, but he has benefits for various demons in his army. So Be'lakor ends up getting like the Shadow Legion keyword. All his demons get Shadow Legion keyword, and this is also an interesting one because you can take up to half your army of Chaos Space Marines, although they're specific about which ones you can take, but it's still a pretty well-rounded list. Damned units, legionaries, possessed, sorcerers, terminators, things like that, like unnamed characters. You can take up to half your army as Chaos Space Marine units, and then you can take Be'lakor and a bunch of demons to fill out the rest. And then depending on what mark of chaos those demons are for, they get certain buffs. And then your undivided stuff, which includes all your Chaos Space Marines, gets Dark Pacts. And so they keep their Dark Pact ability even though they're not in Chaos Space Marines. And Be'lakor automatically passes his Dark Pact's ability, plus everything in your army has Deep Strike. So it plays very differently than anything else. It is like the ultimate fusion of demons and Space Marines. So if you want to play something very different, and Be'lakor is a really neat character to use too, so that's a fun one to play. And then you have 4 god-specific detachments, all named after certain legions. So you've got the Blood Legion. Guess which god that's for? Wrong answers only.
Ow. Oh.
This is the Corn Legion. Their detachment rules basically, if somebody ends up too close to you, you get to run towards them. And also, anytime you kill a unit on an objective, if you control it, you make the objective sticky with their blood, which is just a great image. Because it's not just like, you're not just sticky by being on it, you made it sticky by murdering somebody on it. There's the Scintillating Legion, which is the Tzeentch Legion, and this one I think is kind of neat. You start off with flux tokens that you can spend to like reroll, but every time you spend one, your opponent gets a flux token that they can use to reroll. And then when they use it, you get one, and just go back and forth. Unless your opponent also has this rule. So if you're both playing Scintillating Legion, then you just have 3 flux tokens and eventually you run out. Then Tzeentch is playing against Tzeentch and the plan falls apart. But like Tzeentch is one of these armies, like they play around with luck and things like that. So you've got these like pink and blue, little fiery demons running around and giant bird demons, and you're re-rolling things, and then your opponent is re-rolling things, and then you're re-rolling things again. So then it's like it can benefit them, but it can benefit you. It's just as planned, plans within plans. There's the Plague Legion, which is Nurgle, obviously, and basically gives all your Nurgle demons a 9-inch aura of, this is my Shadow of Chaos. And you can pick an enemy unit in your Shadow of Chaos and force them to take battle shock tests, which might cause them to take mortal wounds. It's okay. It's not bad. And then finally, the Legion of Excess, which is Slanesh, lets you charge after falling back. And unlike the Emperor's Children, you can double up on people then. And also, normally when you charge someone, you have fights first to represent that you're getting the jump on them. Legion of Excess says you can choose not to fight first. And if you choose not to fight first, you get to reroll hit rolls and reroll wound rolls of 1, which the great thing about that is like hitting is not so much the problem, but Slanesh often isn't as high strength. Like their base units are kind of squishy, but like they tend to go with volume of attacks, but also being able to, they have devastating wounds. So theoretically they can wound anything with unsavable wounds, and get a chance to reroll wound rolls of 1 means that's just more chances to stick more wounds. So that one was also very popular competitively when it first came out. It was very good. So if you are interested in playing just a straight up chaos demon army, and there's a bunch of different ways to play that based on like what god or gods you go into and what detachments you want to use, or if you want to splash in chaos space marines, you could even do a chaos demon army that is 1,000 points of chaos space marines, and then demons to fit, and then splash in a chaos knight, because it's still considered a chaos army. So like you can make weird mashup armies with chaos in a way that you can do a little bit with the Imperium. When we get to our final episode, we'll talk about some of the ways you can mash armies together there. But chaos, it has a lot of ways to mash armies together in interesting ways, and all in the service of the 4 dark gods, who all hate each other, and nobody's going to win that fight ever. And chaos will never win because chaos is dumb and gets in its own way all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, that I think wraps up our faction focus on the various forces of chaos. So in our next episode, we'll be talking about the non-human, non-chaos forces in the galaxy, as we talk about the various Xenos races, from big, angry, and green to quiet and metallic and also very, very old, and everything in between. But until then, from all of us here at Preferred Enemies, I'm your host, Rob.
Kevin.
And Richard.
Good night, good gaming, and no, chaos, definitely the bad guys of